On this episode of the DTVC podcast, screenwriter Tom Joliffe is back, and we're going to be talking about his newest one, Death Among the Pines, which he did again with Nathan Shepka Productions, also Flickering Myth Productions. So really, really fun movie, really great movie. You should check it out now. It's $2.99 on Amazon to rent. If you haven't seen it yet, the first half of this episode, we're going to be doing spoiler-free commentary. So we're just going to be discussing the movie in general. Then there'll be a break. You'll get an ad for one of my novels, and then when we come back, then we'll talk spoilers in the second half. So you can listen to the first half spoiler free. Don't worry about it. Hopefully we'll sell you on the movie, then you can maybe pause it if you haven't seen it yet at the halfway point, watch the movie, and then listen to the rest of the commentary. But that's how we're going to set it up. I picked this one up from the Lambcast podcast that I'm on. Richard Kirkham, that's how he does new movies. The first half is no spoilers, and then there's a spoiler wall, and then after we talk about spoilers, so you get the fair warning. So that's how we're going to do this one. But yeah, so stay tuned for that. And then next week, Chris the Brain Kavinsky is back, and we're going to be talking about Diablo, the new one from Scott Adkins and Marco Zaror. So really fun episode there. So that'll be next week. In terms of DTVC Extra, really nothing on the horizon unless I do make it out to see the new Running Man. Then I may pair it with the old Running Man, do like a Running Men, perhaps, DTVC Extra. We'll see if that happens. I'm off from work this week, but I haven't really done much in the first 2 days off. So it's been kind of a crazy week. So we'll see what happens there. But you never know. You never know when you might get a DTVC Extra. So we'll see. Also, YouTube channel. I recorded a video for the opening action sequence in Hard Justice, and the commentary part came out well, but the opening and closing, the lighting looked really horrible. It looked kind of like the way my video looked, my face and everything. It looked like I was, if you remember Joe Lara or Evan Lurie in Hologram Man when they were their hologram selves. That's kind of how it looked, and I was like, I need to get a better version of this. So I meant to record, a new opening and new closing again. I just haven't gotten around to it. So hopefully we'll get that soon because the commentary part was great. So it was a fun one to record. So hopefully we'll get that one up soon. Then in terms of the site, we just did Shepherd Code 2, The Road Back. You may have noticed that review was late as well. We got it up on Monday night. Again, kind of a crazy weekend and everything. So just to give you a sense, we had an issue with one of our cats. So he's doing better now. Doing better now after a huge emergency vet bill, which didn't necessarily get us anywhere. We took him to his regular vet on Monday. And now, after seeing him and he's doing great now. So anyway, but it was kind of a really crazy weekend of having to get him stuff and do all, him meeting the cat. So that's why we fell behind on some things. But we did get Shepherd Code up. Shepherd Code Road Back actually is the movie we covered. The sequel, the Alain Delaby film with Don the Dragon Wilson, Shauna West, Mark Strange. Really, really fun one there. So definitely check that review out. Definitely check that movie out as well if you haven't yet. And then, this weekend, I'm not sure, but I think I might do another indie movie. So we've got Harley Whalen's kicking around. So maybe I'll do that one, his newest one. So keep an eye out for that. And then in terms of me guesting on other people's sites, I did, I did the Lambcast where we talked about Cool Runnings. I did an episode of Forgotten Films that hasn't been released yet. I think he's going to be, Todd's going to be releasing that one soon. And then also Deep Blue Sea. I recorded that one, I think, back in October. They released that one. So Jake Lewitt, the host, and I, we were talking about Shark Attack 2, which, out of the 3 Shark Attacks, that would probably be the one that wouldn't have been the highest on my list to talk about, but it was a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. So look for that. It's a Deep Blue Sea podcast. Definitely check that one out. You should be subscribed to that. If you're like me, every time you see Deep Blue Sea podcast, you get breakfast at Tiffany's in your head. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. But anyway, check that out as well. We're going quick here. The only other thing is, of course, my newest book is Mark in Sales. Now, I haven't had a chance to record a podcast ad for Mark in Sales, so you're going to get an ad for Nadia and Aiden. I'm not like Disney. I don't vault my previous title, so you still can buy Nadia and Aiden, but the new one is Mark in Sales. The link to Mark in Sales is going to be in the podcast description. Always appreciate people. People have already started to buy it. If you haven't bought it yet, it's a great gift for Christmas. It's a great escape for Christmas. One thing I discovered is the paperback and the Kindle, even though they're about $8 different in price, I get the same royalty no matter what. It's actually exactly the same royalty. So I was kind of surprised to see that. But don't feel like, if I get the Kindle, I'm shortchanging him. You're not shortchanging me. Get whichever copy works best for you. But if you can only afford the Kindle, hey, why not? Go for it. The other thing is, I went with a bigger font for Mark and Sales. I went with a 12-point font. So I'm going to start bumping up the other previous books. So Nadia and Aiden's already 12-point font, but the other 4 books, I'm going to bump those up to 12-point font. So Chad and Accounting, Girl in a Gun, Holtman Arms, and Don's House in the Mountains. Eventually, there's going to be new editions of those that are at 12-point font as well. It means they're going to be much bigger versions than they are now. But keep an eye out for that too. But yes, you want to pick up Mark and Sales. I always appreciate anybody who wants to pick those up. But yeah, I think I've covered everything. We're in and out in 5 minutes here. Not bad at all. So John Cross from Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures is going to play in our theme song. Again, Small Business Saturday. You're looking to support indie creatives. Go to Bandcamp and buy some albums of John's. My suggestion is if you're looking for John's music from Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, start with his newest one and just work your way back chronologically and eventually buy all of them because they're all fantastic. But his newest one is really great, and I think you can just kind of work your way back from there. But go check him out. The link to his Bandcamp is in the podcast description as well. So definitely pick up some of John's music. Support indie creatives here on this Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday, whatever it is that you want to support indie creatives. Hey, it doesn't need to be a special day. Just do it anytime, right? I always try my best to support indie creatives as well. Speaking of which, after John plays in our theme song here, when we come back, Tom Joliffe is going to be talking about Death Among the Pines with us, another indie creative, $2.99 on Amazon. So you can get that as well. But yes, stay tuned for that, and we'll be back in just a bit. Hey everyone, welcome back to the DTVC podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I'm joined once again by a very special guest. We've got Tom Joliffe, a screenwriter who's been on multiple times, and we're going to be talking about his newest movie, Death Among the Pines. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely, yeah, and congratulations on the film. I really, really enjoyed this. I was trying to think. I don't think it's a competition. It shouldn't be a competition between your other movies, but this one is definitely up there as one of my favorites.
Yep, glad to hear it.
Yeah, I think. I was trying to think of like. I think before this, I think When Darkness Falls might have been my favorite, and it felt like some of the elements that you used in When Darkness Falls of kind of like creating sort of these claustrophobic themes. You're kind of in a confined space or in one short space. With that one, you use the darkness of the Highlands of Scotland, when it comes night, it's like you can't really see much around you, and it's very confining. But here you used a rainstorm in a small kind of cottage just outside of Glasgow to create that same vibe, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. I mean, we were kind of a little bit inspired by When Darkness Falls in terms of doing something that was quite budget conscious, and also we wanted to make use of the location. I mean, we've done that in everything really, where the location itself becomes a key part of the film. But we were looking at projects to do. We kind of wanted to do something, I wouldn't necessarily say easy per se, but less kind of elaborate and big than perhaps The Baby in the Basket, and also other things that we're looking at next. So we kind of wanted to have almost a gap filler, but at the same time try and make it as good as possible.
Yeah, I mean, definitely did that. I mean, just the location itself. All of the rooms seem small. I mean, the living room, is kind of maybe the most expansive, but even that one, especially when Steven comes into the story, when Steven's character is like the police officer investigating investigating the escaped criminal. It feels really small, right? When you go from 2 to 3 people in that space. But I mean, the kitchen, and then like when Nathan's by himself upstairs in the bedroom, putting on Nico's character's, Angela's husband's clothes. I mean, the way that the roof slopes and the ceiling there, where it's like he's almost hitting his head at points. It just kind of made the whole thing feel so cramped.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was exactly the kind of thing we were trying to look for. We don't explicitly state it in the film, but we wanted to have it as almost like a period set. So we were thinking initially of the 70s, and then we kind of moved it slightly up to maybe sometime around sort of pre-mobile phones, so sort of 90s time. But yeah, the kind of location where this is set, you get all these kind of old school, very unique kind of farmhouse cottages. So, you know, a lot of places are like that. They've got the sloped floors, sloped roofs. You know, it's not like the suburban kind of areas here where everything's kind of made to measure and built exactly the same. Everything's kind of in these cottages is quite unique. And again, yeah, and a lot of them are quite cramped.
Yeah, yeah, and to your point about the timelessness, or I don't know if that's the right term for what timeless is, but the fact that you couldn't place it in a specific time,
Yeah.
I thought in particular the wardrobe really made that where I was like, I can't necessarily place. I mean, maybe Nico's jeans might have been a little bit more modern, perhaps, but I mean, especially when Nathan changes into the husband's clothes, and he's kind of sitting there drinking his whiskey, it's really hard to place that in a specific time.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we kind of wanted to have it like that and just make it at a point that was not really technologically advanced. Because, I mean, one of the criticisms we got with When Darkness Falls is that it's set during a period where everyone has a mobile phone. So we had to kind of work into the story, which is maybe one of the clunkier parts of it, that they decided to kind of put their phones away and not take them because they wanted to have the real experience of kind of backpacking properly without having to rely on that. But then obviously, yeah, we wanted to kind of avoid those criticisms somewhat and set it in this thing where they're very cut off. So that was part of the thing we wanted to add to the claustrophobia of it.
Yeah, and I think to your point about When Darkness Falls, the thing I think the reason why I was okay with that, with them not having cell phones, was that it's Elle O'Hara's character essentially convinces Michaela Lundgren's character to do away with their phones for a purpose, right? She has a purpose.
Yeah.
But that kind of brings me to another point. Maybe this is maybe better for the spoiler wall. Is sort of like because the story in this movie is that Nico Nico's character Angela, she's living by herself, or she's by herself. She's not living by herself. She's by herself, and she gets a knock on the door on this rainy night, and it's Nathan's character saying, and we find out later his name's Kevin, that he is, his car broke down and he needs help, he needs assistance, and there's almost a sense of like, why would she let him in, and it's you have to kind of, the audience has to kind of trust that, just follow along with that. And I kind of felt like the same thing with the cell phone thing. It's like, okay, the dynamic between those two, especially when When Darkness Falls, when we find out what the dynamic really truly is, it makes sense. But I can kind of see too where it's like, why would Michaela, how do you believe that she would go along with that when Elle O'Hara tells her to, we're going to get rid of our phones?
Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, hopefully we kind of all the logic comes back around at some point as you discover more things in the film, obviously in that film as well, but also in this. So we were quite conscious of that and wanting there to be a kind of reasoning behind everything in the characters' motivations.
Yeah, which I think comes through. And yeah, maybe, like I said, I may have teased that a little bit, but when we get to the spoiler wall, of course, I think people would know going in, like, okay, there's going to be stuff that's revealed later, but I'll kind of get into it more then, because I definitely have some questions about that as well. I guess maybe from the performances standpoint, I mean, I think one of the things that I liked about the way you wrote this, Tom, was that it starts off essentially as almost like a two-person or a two-hander kind of thing, where it's Angela, and then it's Nathan's character Kevin, and they're kind of going back and forth, and there's a lot of tension there. And I know from a screenwriting standpoint, you probably would say, okay, you can't have just two characters for an hour and a half, right? Like even My Dinner with Andre still has the waiter scowling at them at times, right? So it's like, but it felt like you brought Steven's character, the police officer who's investigating it. It felt like you brought him in before things got worn or tired between Nathan and Nico's characters. He comes in at a point where he kind of feels more like a party crasher, which I thought was a really great way to use the fact that we're going to need his energy to propel the movie forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we knew from the outset that we were going to be focused on quite a small group of characters, three main kind of cast, and then one sort of in there as well, extra in there as well. Um, but yeah, we were trying to really kind of build some energy in terms of like the dynamic between characters and what they're kind of revealing about themselves and what they're holding back. So yeah, that was a real key thing, and again, that goes back to some of our influences from people like Hitchcock.
Yeah, and I mean the Hitchcockian thing. I think with Steven's character as a police officer stood out for me because I remember an interview that Hitchcock did where he said when he was really young, his dad, I guess I don't know if he got into trouble or something, and his dad took him to a jail. I think he may have even been locked in a cell or something like that for a short period of time. But it was like the whole experience really freaked him out. And like whenever he used police officers in his movies, there was an element of like danger or malevolence. When they would be there, a character might be
Yeah,
sitting in his car and get a knock on the window, and it's a police officer causing issues. And I like that because I think going from that tradition, you go, okay, so Steven's character, he's the police officer. Ideally you'd think, okay, in this sort of situation, the police officer would be there to help things. But knowing that his Hitchcockian tradition, and it felt like Steven kind of played it in a way that was like you don't necessarily even know necessarily what his motives are.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we wanted the characters to have like everyone really to have this interesting duality that keeps the audience guessing through each stage of the film.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely there. I definitely, it again, it was one of those things where I think, especially early on, the sort of the chemistry between Nathan and Nico and their performance there, it drives so much of that. And I think like introducing Steven where you do, where we're still experiencing the tension so much between the two of them that Steven, again, he's kind of like this party crusher, like, oh, I don't know if I need a third person here yet. But we were going to need a third person eventually, and so to bring him in at that point, I thought did a really great job with that. And I think from the actor's standpoint, they kind of understood, even though their characters wouldn't have understood. They seem to understand what the motivation was.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's that difficult balance really because we went into this knowing that we wanted to make something relatively simple with a just a few like a small core group of characters and kind of really hold attention because it wasn't going to be action packed or loaded with action. We ended up almost having more kind of action than we originally intended. But yeah, we knew there's an inherent risk of having a film resting just on two characters for long periods. So um, it was finding that balance of when to bring Stephen in and how to structure it and how to kind of work in certain moments like flashbacks.
Yeah, which I thought also worked well too, because I think, because I think throughout the story we get breadcrumbs. Characters let things slip
Yeah,
here or there, but I also like the way that he used the flashbacks as breadcrumbs as well. That they weren't like these sort of like, okay, we're going to give Nathan's character's entire backstory here. We're going to get bits and pieces and sort of let you kind of figure it out as you go.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to spell everything out, explicitly, really. And in terms of like flashbacks and things, we wanted to kind of just feed enough nuggets to the audience, um, partly to just be efficient, but also we also had in mind right from the off that this was going to be like a very tight film and be comfortably under 90 minutes.
Yeah, which I think is perfect as well. Because I think again, it with the actors that you have sort of carrying these certain moments here. And I think from a story standpoint, knowing okay, if I'm at this point, I've only got so much left to go. So things are going to start to kind of keep moving. But I also I don't know. I think one of the things I liked about also I always like a good tight running time. But I also with this movie, I don't know how to explain it. As I was watching it, I thought it was going to go in one direction. I think that's sort of the idea, right? Is that as the audience,
Yeah,
you think it's going in, and even though you go in expecting twists, the twists that we get are not ones that they weren't ones that I was expecting. And I think what made that so great was that with that running time, you're almost like, okay, well now it's like, oh, I saw this going one way. How are we going to go in this other way with the time left? And so again, it was more intriguing, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we knew we kind of had to do something that was quick and efficient, but also every time you had a certain way where you were maybe leading the audience one way, because I mean, audiences these days are savvy, so if they go into watching a thriller, they're probably waiting for twists to happen, and even when it starts to go ways where they think it might be a bit predictable, it's there where we kind of want to layer in one or two other things. I mean, we did it to an extent in When Darkness Falls as well, but we were kind of wary of doing. We wanted to do that kind of again on this one as well. So yeah, hopefully. I mean, we've had some nice reviews so far, and people have kind of got what we were going for, and appreciated the fact that they were surprised by certain things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's always an important. I guess as a writer, and I know you Nathan worked on the story as well, and I think like and then Nathan directed it. It's almost like you kind of put all this work into this movie, and of course the actors as well. And I guess that's part of it, right? It's like there's one part of it, like whether it's high quality or not, and then there's the other part of like, did the audience get it, right? And it's like,
Yeah,
when you have people that say, okay, yeah, no, I see what you're going for there, that it worked. This element of it worked for me. I imagine that's got to be kind of a, I don't want to say a vindication of all that work, because I think maybe even seeing it on the screen is is vindication. But like, yeah, like, okay, yes, they did go for it.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's nice that the first official review that we got for it, they really kind of got the intent behind the film. That's always something that I quite appreciate, whether someone likes it or not. If they kind of get what we were going for, and certain creative decisions, then I can accept if they didn't quite like it. But we live in this kind of era, particularly on lower budget films, where people don't really give films the attention that they might deserve. So, you know, it's if there's one thing I can't sort of accept really from criticism, it's when that they've not really paid attention to the film. They'll call up points and say, okay, this made no sense, or that made no sense, or I didn't like this part, but they've not really got the intent. And because they've probably not been paying attention, or they've been scrolling on their phone, I mean, that could be again a failing on our part. But as long as they've kind of given it the due attention and reviewed it there, then I can accept a bit of criticism. But thankfully on this, so far anyway, we've had some pretty nice reviews, and people have kind of got the exact intent of what we were going for. So yeah, that's really pleasing, really.
Yeah, that's another great point, because I see this sometimes when I review a movie, and I always like to look at the critic reviews, just to kind of see what other people have thought about the movie. And it is always interesting when I see the critic reviews and I see somebody say, "Well, I didn't really like that part of the movie," and I'm like, "But that wasn't a part of the movie. Like, you missed what actually happened there." And or like there'll be a certain element to the film, like maybe a character was feigning something the whole time, but they really weren't in that situation. And the movie's like, I didn't like how they were in that situation. It's like, but they were never really in it if you caught the whole thing. Yeah, and I do kind of feel like this movie maybe has less of an opportunity for that maybe than say like When Darkness Falls. Like you said, like I think you could miss in When Darkness Falls, you could miss the moment where Elle is, you could both miss the fact that Elle tells Michaela Lungren's character, we're going to do away with our phones, but also kind of miss if you're not paying attention to the dynamic between those two characters,
Yeah,
and how Michaela Longden's character would have gone along with that. It's an easy enough miss, like you said, if you're scrolling on your phones, you're looking up the actors on IMDb. I mean, I sometimes do that. I will be frank, I don't do it with your movies, or when people submit a screener, I don't do it for that. But if I'm watching a Randall Emmett, John Travolta movie, I'm like, I recognize that actor from somewhere. It's like, okay, they're just talking about whatever here. But to your point, I think also if I go and say, something happened there and I missed that, I'll go back and see, did I actually miss it, or did they just not talk about it? So I think that's also important too. That like if you are scrolling on your phone and you feel like you missed a plot point, you should go back and check it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some people will watch these kind of films at this budget level and maybe assume that there's nothing much going on beneath the surface. I mean, we had a little bit of that with The Baby in the Basket, that people didn't always appreciate uh, maybe the layers that we tried to put in. It kind of like dismissing it as a goofy kind of nun horror. Um, when we were trying to do a bit more than that. Really, I felt like we pulled it off. But so every now and again, any time a nice review would pop up, and most of the critics, we got quite good reviews. It tends to be where it's the IMDb crowd or the Letterboxd crowd where they've not, they're only compelled to review if they want to say something bad about a film. Um, People don't go off and go out of their way to review a film if they think, oh, it's a 5 or 6 or 7 out of 10. It's kind of like it's not worth the effort. So it's either they're compelled because they think it's a 10 out of 10, or they think it's a 1 out of 10. Inevitably, at this budget level, you get more one out of tens than the top end. But that's what we have to live with as filmmakers. But as long as we're kind of happy with what we've put out, that's the main thing.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I know there's one director, Jared Masters, who I'm following on Instagram. I haven't seen any of his films yet. I've been meaning to watch some, but he's always posting the worst IMDb reviews on Instagram with like images of the movie, it's like this is the worst. I wash my ass with Peter, whatever they say, and he's like, but then he'll say like, oh, check this movie out. It's on Tubi now, and to be honest, for me, it makes me more interested. I'm like, okay, now I want to support this guy's work more, and I haven't watched any of his movies yet. I've been meaning to. But it is one of those things where you almost have to lean into it. But I also think too, I think for me, maybe as a watcher, I think when I first started doing reviews in the late 2000s, I didn't have any idea that I'd be talking to directors, screenwriters, actors, anybody like yourself that's in the business. And I remember Albert Pyun when he first responded to one of mine. I was like, wait, Albert Pyun's reading my reviews? Like, and it changed the whole mindset. And I remember, the thing I always remember is that he came to me after we had been talking back and forth. And I always tell this story that he said, hey, could you review Mean Guns again? I think maybe you should give it another chance. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll if he's asking, of course I'm going to give it another chance. And I went and read my review and saw that I said, a guy who directs car commercials could do a better job than this. And
Yeah.
he easily could have said, like, this kid in, what is he, in his parents' basement writing this crap? Like, who cares about him? I don't, But instead, he came to me and said, because I think it was because another one of his movies, I said, something must have gone wrong with this production, because Albert Pyun doesn't make movies that are this poor. It was like one of the Urban trilogy that he did, that he, I guess when they shot it in Bulgaria, when the film crates were coming back to the U.S., they lost an entire crate of film, and so he was like, he told the story. He's like, yeah, he's like, oh, good job that you caught that. I'm glad that you did that, and that's kind of how that started. But he easily could have just been like, I don't want anything to do with that guy. But by the same token, for me, it was a learning experience too, where I was like, you know what? Okay, people that make these movies do read these reviews, and I should be a little bit, a little bit better. I mean, another person was Jay Horton, who kind of taught me, just talking back and forth with him about how the movie. And I saw you gave him a thank you in the credits on this, but he's taught me a lot about sort of, especially this sort of level of indie filmmaking, what goes into making those movies and what can happen on different stages. That's made me more cognizant when I review movies, to be like, okay, if certain things don't work, it's one thing if they don't work for me, but I shouldn't be harsh on the movie for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite similar, really, when I was before screenwriting. When I was reviewing films, I got a similar thing where I just absolutely eviscerated Retrograde with Dolph.
You're right, yes.
And this was on the old days of IMDb, when you could kind of message people or post comments and things like that. So the director contacted me and just sort of said, well, he kind of like gave me some insights into the actual production itself, which was basically a disaster. And he ended up sending me also a director's cut of the film with a different grade and slightly different cut, which I really appreciated as well. And that started to change my mindset, but also more so when I started producing myself and getting my own reviews on films. I really did sort of change my mindset. So yeah, I'm more appreciative. But I mean, I'm still quite harsh on some films, but it's usually the ones that have gone and spent $200 million and really have no excuses.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. I mean, I think like I think one of yours that you came on here to talk about, Renegades, is one where
Yeah.
the budget was tight there. I know, and of course, late Daniels really directed that, who was somebody who could always make a lot of really great stuff happen on a tight budget. But I know like there's certain locations that you couldn't really shoot them up. You had to use computer generated bullets, stuff like that. But the cast involved was just so earnest and great in their performances, and the movie was just so much fun that it's like, you can harp on the budgetary limitations and say, oh well, it didn't look like this polished action film product. Or you can look at the performances and the fun that everybody's having to just kind of make a fun action movie that, and I thought your writing on that was fantastic as well. I think you kind of get to the meat of like what makes a good action movie a lot of fun. You can either go into a movie wanting to give it a hard time and trash it for its faults, or accept that there are some limitations and go for the fun in the areas that really go well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that one was almost a minor miracle that it got made in the end, because it was coming sort of just after COVID and we still had so many restrictions in the UK. It was that period where, most films were having to lose 10% of a budget on COVID stuff and, COVID marshals, COVID gear. So it still kind of had that to deal with, and then less choice in locations. So yeah, I still enjoy watching that one as well.
Yeah, that one's always a fun one. I mean, I think I haven't gotten into the most recent Shogun films. I haven't had a chance to watch them yet. I know they've got a Halloween. They came out and some other ones there, but that initial period with Nemesis and Renegades, those two from Shogun, and producing on Nemesis and writing Renegades, that I was a great for that. For them at Shogun Films and Jonathan Sothcott and Janine Narissa Sothcott, I just loved what they were doing there, and I'm kind of excited to see what other movies they've got coming.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just great to see people producing movies in the UK. Quite a difficult period. I mean, it's difficult all over, but yeah, indie filmmakers still kind of going out there and making things in a kind of in that 80s mold, I suppose.
Yeah, and kind of going back to those COVID restrictions, because when we were talking about When Darkness Falls, we talked about how the COVID restrictions in a way actually helped with that production,
Yeah.
because there were a lot of empty streets that you could film on to make it more desolate. You were able to find Airbnbs to film in and everything. And did that kind of like inspire? Obviously you didn't have the same restrictions here for making Death Among the Pines, but that kind of inspired like that you were able to, the things that you kind of learned from making that on the COVID. With COVID restrictions, that you could kind of even use them now that you don't necessarily have those restrictions, but use some of those elements to make this film as well.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, it was the part of the reasoning behind it was that was a fairly low budget film, When Darkness Falls. So it was it didn't cost a lot, and then it did quite well on platforms like Tubi, Amazon, Voodoo. So we were kind of looking at something we could do, like I said before, as a sort of a gap filler, but also in a genre that isn't necessarily always fancied by distributors. So it's quite hard to get anything off the ground that isn't horror or action. And then action tends to be something where you need a lot more money. So yeah, we were quite keen to, I suppose, in an indulgent way, do kind of like a film more like we wanted to do. So we quite fancied doing another thriller, something a bit Hitchcockian, but also maybe more so referencing the kind of Hitchcock referencing films of the 90s, those kind of classic sort of thrillers and pot boilers. So yeah, we kind of went in with the intent of making something, yeah, like I say, in theory simple. In reality, as things always happens with filmmaking, that we had so many difficulties on actually making the film. But in the end, we've managed to pull it off and get it released. So yeah, we're quite happy.
Yeah, it's always kind of the way, right? That this was supposed to be your filler movie that you were going to
Yeah.
put in between. Then, yeah, we run into this. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about like those '90s thrillers, I always think about that. And I imagine that probably a similar thing that probably happened with those too, where you watch one of those, growing up on cable, I'd see, they'd be on like a Saturday afternoon or something like that, or you'd see them in the video store, and it'd be like maybe like Michael Madsen. I think there was one that had like Michael Madsen and Helen Slater, where she was house sitting and he comes to the house and he's like an escaped convict, and he essentially is holding her hostage, and then there's kind of like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. But it's like it takes place in this really nice mansion that they were able to shoot in or whatever. But then when you start to see holes in a movie like that, I think there's almost a sense of like, okay, what went wrong maybe, and that
Yeah.
how did they, and the distributor was like, no, you need to get this thing out. We need to get this thing out to cable companies and to the video stores. And I mean, and I guess in your case, with this being more of an independent film, is there still that same impetus to like, okay, we need to like get it to maybe like the film festivals or something like that at a certain time?
We was kind of a little bit time dependent, just that we wanted to get something out quite quickly, and not sort of be hanging around too long, because you kind of want to keep up a bit of momentum. So we've ended up it actually coming out quicker than we originally thought it would do. So we were expecting maybe first quarter next year, which would have been a nice kind of follow up to The Baby in the Basket. So 1 year later, we would have had another one. So yeah, we didn't really consider festivals on this one. We just sort of thought we'll get it out and we'll hopefully get it earning some money and then start focusing on the next thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. I can totally see that, and it is interesting you talked about that, because I remember when Nathan was sending out trailers and sending out publicity stuff on it. I remember that he was talking about early next year, and so I was kind of setting up my screeners, because also another Nathan Hill, who from Australia, a director. I knew his movie was close, but I wasn't sure when that was going to come. And I had a feeling, and then I know Jay Horton's got another one coming soon as well. So it's almost like everybody's sort of kind of getting close together. I was trying to figure out how I would portion it out. And then Nathan's like, "Hey, it's out there. It's available now." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." And I want to say he emailed me a week after Nathan Hill emailed me about his newest one, Bitter Desire. So it was kind of like all of them right together. But I was like, "Hey, we're here already. Let's do it. Let's go for it." And I was excited to see it. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's been a bit of a slog in terms of getting it together, getting it out, just ironing out a few problems here and there, and then all of a sudden it just drops like that. I mean, part of this one was also a little bit of an experiment in distribution in terms of using Film Hub, which again, it's also why we wanted to do something quite cost efficient in terms of a film as well. So one of the drawbacks, I suppose, on Film Hub is that you're less kind of in control of like the time scale of when things drop. You kind of submit, and then things get accepted, and then they kind of like appear. So it was almost the case of it just appeared, and we were like, oh damn, it's already there. So yeah, it's been a bit of a mad rush, but we're happy it's out now, and we're happy that it's getting a good response so far.
Yeah. I've seen a video. Speaking of going back to Jay Horton, because he does those videos on sort of making movies, and he did one on Film Hub. Because it's sort of like it's a different setup where if you're kind of doing it on your own, you're submitting them on your own, right, to like Tubi or Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, it's very different, and then also, usually you would go via a distributor. So some films you might go via a sales agent to get a distributor, who will then put it through an aggregator to go on Amazon, Tubi, and all that. So these are all kind of like layers and people that take a percentage. But Film Hub, in theory, cuts out a few middlemen. But the flip side of that is you have a little bit less control, and then also you're basically responsible for all your marketing. But in this day and age in indie distribution, most filmmakers have to be responsible for their own marketing anyway, because very few distributors at a lower budget level will put any effort in at all. So again, we were kind of a little bit disillusioned with the distribution that's available around at the moment at kind of a lower budget level. So yeah, it's kind of like, in some ways the film is a bit of a guinea pig for us. So we'll see how it goes. But again, it all boils down to, when we're making a film, whatever we want to make, it's we want something that we put out to be good, and hopefully get a good response.
No, that totally makes sense. And yeah, that's I think it's another one with Jay Horton where he talks about,
Yeah.
advertising, or getting out there about his, different strategies for doing the publicity for your films. And I mean, even for me with my novels, just watching his stuff and being like, yeah, I there's a lot more that I could be doing, to get the word out. But it is, to your point. I mean, but it's interesting thinking about it two ways, because for me, as someone who does the reviews, on the one hand, when I get these sort of these publicity companies, or publicists who just send me these blanket emails that I know they're sending to however many people, maybe if I see the movie and I go, okay, that's one that interests me, I'll review it. But usually it's more when the director or screenwriter, producer, somebody comes to me directly and says, hey, will you review my movie? And sort of develop that personal connection, because what happens is that, similar to what's happening right now, where we're talking about Death Among the Pines, or like, Nathan with Nathan Hill with Bitter Desire with his movie, I bump them up in the queue in terms of like what I want to review, because it's like, okay, we've got this relationship, we've talked about movies in the past, I'm going to do what I can to try to help get the word out about this. And so on the one hand, I think, yeah, it's a lot more work. Obviously, Nathan Shepka, he's out there emailing all kinds of people, and trying to get the word out. That it's kind of having to do that individually, and then do the same thing on Facebook. Like, oh, this person, posted the trailer, sharing all of that. It's a lot of work there. But on the other hand, when you develop those personal connections, it's like, okay, the reviewers like myself, we're going to be more likely to, want to help out when these new movies come out.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just a bit more of a personal touch, really. I mean, some publicists are better than others. I mean, we had issues with the review requests going out via the distributor on Baby in the Basket, that we wanted to have like an embargo on it, prior to release, but they just kind of ignored us on that and then sent it out to all and sundry. And we ended up having a problem with a reviewer putting video footage of the film on his review before it was released, and also video footage of spoilers. So that became a big issue. So again, sometimes it just becomes a case of, if you want something done, you might as well do it yourself. So yeah, we're kind of taking care of it on this one. We know some good publicity companies that helped us do really good stuff with the Baby in the Basket as well. So once we kind of get to maybe the point of it coming on Tubi, we might look into that as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, again, with Baby in the Basket, it was like, it's easy for you to tell me like, hey, there's an embargo, don't review this before a certain time, or this is when we would like you to do the review, can you do it that way? And it's like, sure, we can make that happen. We can, or like, when you and Nathan came on to talk about Baby in the Basket, when can we schedule the podcast to release? It's like, okay, these 2 weeks work perfect. It's a lot easier to do that, right, than it is when, like I said, like, when I get these ones from just, anybody who, I shouldn't say anybody, but, publicists for places, they're just sending it out, and it's like, okay, I want to review that one. If they're not telling me, hey, actually don't review this now, then, I won't know. And I'll just, put it in my queue when I'm going to review it. And then, like you said, you might end up in a situation where somebody is posting spoilers, that kind of thing. I mean, I do try to avoid spoilers. If I want to spoil, I mean, of course, I also don't do video, so that's another piece of it. So I guess you don't have to worry as much with me, but it's that idea, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we're not massively fussed in terms of that. If the film's out there and people can see it anyway, it's when it's kind of like, a month or so before, and someone's spoiling the ending and putting the video up. Yeah, so it's it becomes an issue. But again, sometimes, from a filmmaker's point of view, if you get someone on publicity, you want them to be treating your film, like it's not just one of the numbers. I mean, it might be that case anyway, but yeah, you want it to feel a bit more kind of like this care and taking over it. So yeah, and again, if you do it yourself, then you're taking that care yourself.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you're building those connections, I guess, too. That you've got sort of a group of reviewers that you can come out to and say, okay, can you post the trailer? Can you do those kinds of things? And so, yeah, that makes sense. Now, I had another question actually about, I don't know if it's a bit about distribution, but maybe just sort of in the market itself. When I think of America here in the U.S., when it comes to movies that are made outside the U.S., it feels like, at least for us, like there's almost like a gating process in terms of like what is, kind of filtered out to us. And, whether it's, a movie like Death Among the Pines that's made in Scotland, that's about people from Scotland, and it's not a Scotland that's like nice like shoreline area with like people in kilts and whatever hanging out at pubs or whatever. This kind of not the quaint idea of Scotland, or like we get with
Yeah.
Nathan Hill where he makes his movies in Australia, and there's no koalas or kangaroos in them or anything like that. It feels like there's a mindset for American audiences of like, well, they won't buy it if there's not that quaintness or like that novelty of the other place. Like they don't want to know what people in Scotland or Australia are just doing in their regular lives. And do you find that when you're sort of trying to distribute a movie, like for example this one here, that it takes place in Scotland, it could be a cable movie from the 90s in that sense, but is there a sense of like, oh well, Americans aren't going to watch this if it's not just because it's in Scotland?
I mean, yeah, from the distributor's perspective, they might think that. It tends to be a genre where if it gets, I mean, it's coming slightly more back into fashion, the sort of thrillers. But I mean, if you look at the big screen, for example, you don't see too many of these kind of thrillers anymore that were just out all the time in the 90s, and then they were all over cable as well, and HBO specials. So they're coming back a little bit more into it in terms of like streaming originals and things like that. But we really like these kind of films, and we kind of want to put them out. So you kind of have to sort of make your bed with the fact that you're probably going to have to do it on a lower budget, and try and find ways to kind of distribute it yourself. But yeah, we were quite keen to do something that I suppose wasn't fashionable within distribution, because at the moment there's a preoccupation with, maybe it might be 7-figure action films with a Mel Gibson type or a Adkins or whoever it might be. This quite a small pool of like bankable names. Otherwise, it's low budget horror, and it tends to be stuff that's maybe based off public domain. So like you've got a Betty Boop film is coming out soon, because I think there's 2 coming out actually, but yeah, that's just come into public domain. So there's horror spins on those. But we wanted to do something, like those kind of early 90s pot boilers. So we kind of knew a couple of things. One, that we would do it lower budget and just kind of retain full control. And then 2, that we were going to kind of use it as a guinea pig for distributing it ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, because I think one of the things I think, especially looking up some of the CVs on some of the actors, like for example Nicolette McKeown, who's the star of this movie. I was looking at her other films, and I was like, oh, she's done a good amount of stuff in Scotland, and these movies look like they're things I'd want to watch, but it's like if the movie that's made in Scotland isn't about like maybe like an American, maybe that's part of the reason maybe why When Darkness Falls was pushed more here in America, because it was the 2 characters were playing Americans in Scotland, but it's almost like this idea of like an Americans. And to be fair, it wasn't Americans in Scotland like experiencing like this culture shock of Scotland, but that seems to be like the thing, is like if it's Scotland, it has to be a novelty of Scotland, or if it's Australia, it's got to be a novelty of Australia. And I think for me, and I think there is enough of a market, I don't think I'm alone in this, of people that just want to watch good movies. They just want to see. And I do think it's one of the things that kind of frustrates me as an American, especially when I was looking at her CV and seeing all these movies that look like they're things that I would enjoy watching, and I'd never heard of them before. Like they hadn't, they weren't things that get pushed to me when I'm on Tubi or any of the other places. And it is kind of a frustrating thing, because I think as Americans, yes, there's a certain segment of Americans that won't watch anything that's not just, either people with American accents, or if they're, if they have a foreign accent, or if they're from another part of the English speaking world, they want some sort of quaintness to it, I guess, or whatever. But there are enough of us that, actually are interested in movies from other parts of the world that are just, just good movies that don't have to be like, there's nothing quaint about the location or anything like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, the distributors might not want to gamble on certain things, but what we tend to see is that, if you go on to Tubi on America, or, via VPN, for example, then, we would see that a lot of films in this genre are, quite popular. So, people are watching them, Distributors just don't seem to want to gamble on it. But yeah, that's what we're quite keen to do, is every now and again just flip it up a bit, because we don't want to end up just doing public domain horrors all the time, or just getting stuck doing the same things. And again, in terms of the action genre, they tend to get a lot of views as well, but that's a genre where maybe people would expect to have more names in it, or people that they recognize. So yeah, that obviously requires more time and bigger budget, so it can be quite a difficult process to get those actually made. We're in an industry at the moment where people are taking fewer gambles, and it's quite difficult for to convince investors to put money into these films, and also to convince studios to kind of back them, or distributors to pick them up and maybe put money in as well. Because streaming is quite difficult, because at the end of the day, if you're on AVOD and the advertising video on demand, you're talking sort of pennies, if that, per hour of a stream. So the returns aren't brilliant either. So you can kind of see why people won't take any major gambles. But again, I mean, when we went back to When Darkness Falls, for example, with the girls being American characters, that was a conscious decision, because I've written so many films over the years, and there's always been American characters in them, sometimes inexplicably, and sometimes they just cast people that can't actually do the accent, so it becomes counterproductive. This one we just thought, we'll keep it Scottish. The actors won't be too broad with their accent, because if they go, I suppose if you level it up to 10 out of 10 Scottish, they would need subtitles. Nathan will tell you that himself. But we kept it quite dialed down, I suppose. So it has that exotic element as well, to some extent. And again, people will watch it, and they kind of like to see these locations that look a bit different to where they're from. And again, people pick up on this. They picked up on it with When Darkness Falls, with Baby in the Basket. The locations kind of stand out, and they're a bit, quite eye-catching. So yeah, people will watch them. So we're quite happy to get another thriller out there as well.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think that's awesome. It's funny we mentioned about the accents. I remember I went and saw Radiohead in concert. I think it was like the late '90s here in America, and the Scottish group Teenage Fan Club opened for them, and with the microphone and kind of the distortion, nobody could understand what they were saying except for this woman from from England who was sitting near our section, and so she was translating for us the whole time. So she was like, "No, this is what they said," But I mean, yes, in this movie here, I don't, it's funny. I always put the subtitles on. The subtitles don't always know what's going on. Because I guess they're AI generated subtitles, and so they sometimes miss things. But yeah, there's nothing really like that you can't understand it. And I think for me, I think that's that's a good thing, that there's not this push of like, okay, well, everybody's got to play Americans in these movies for it to I wish there was more of that sense. I guess that's my thing, is that it's like what was the movie I saw, The Gardener, with Gary Daniels, and so yeah. And obviously he didn't have an accent. He didn't put on a different accent. He was using his own natural voice. And you had Robert Bronzy, of course. He's just Robert Bronzy. He's not going to do anything. But the family in it, they were all UK actors who were using American accents. And there was this whole shoehorned in part of the story that they were from America, but they were living in England for the husband's job. And I was like, why did we need any of that? Like, why couldn't they have just been from the UK? Why couldn't they have just been English? And so it is always weird, but I think there's a sensibility of like, well, Americans won't watch it if there's too many people that aren't from America in the movie, which maybe is true. But I mean, America, there's like 350 million people in America. There's like depending on what numbers you need to pull, there's a good segment of the population that don't need that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're hoping so. And then I'm seeing a little bit of a shift certainly in some of the lower budget companies I've worked with, where they're they're quite happy to just keep accents English or regional, rather than shoehorning in American characters. I mean, if you can make it work and it feels, natural and right, and you can, get a real American actor or someone that can actually do the accent, and that's fine. But sometimes it just feels too shoehorned, or it's not explained properly, or they try and set the film in America and it doesn't look right at all. Um, and again, that's one thing that audiences, they'll always pick up on it, even if they're half flipping on their phone when they're watching the film. They'll still pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with those Christmas movies that they make in British Columbia, I think I think it's like Victoria, British Columbia, where they make all of them. I think, or most of them
Yeah,
anyway. Even those as an American, I watch those and I'm like, yeah, that's really not America. Like, it's not, and Canada and America are very similar, but you still pick up on those. But definitely, yeah, when it's in England, it's like, yeah. There was one, I don't know if it was a Jesse V. Johnson movie. There was one where I think they were passing Ipswich off for like a part of America, and I was just like, yeah, that's just, I can tell, they think like
yeah,
the seaside areas, the buildings. I mean, there are parts of the United States that have some of that, like, like here in Philadelphia, like in like kind of what they call the old city area, you can film in certain areas and maybe you could pass off a part of England as old city Philadelphia. But for the most part, like you said, American audiences are savvy enough to catch it. But I think, for example, when it's like low budget horror movies, I almost feel like that audience would be more keen to see, people using their natural accents and almost be like, oh yeah, this was made in the UK. It's different from the other movies that I see that are all just based in the United States. And it's like a bunch of teenagers in a small town in the US getting bumped off or something like that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you would get more response by doing that, really, than trying to force American accents into it, or doing it, because if you're going to try and set something in one place and film it in another, a big part of that might be production design, locations, and just basically all things that cost money. And if you're doing it on a shoestring budget, then you're not going to pull it off. So you might as well roll with where you're filming.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too I've always wondered, like when it comes to those movies, with the UK actors that are involved, is part of the draw for them that they can put an American accent on their demo reel, right? That like, okay, I can show that I
Yeah,
can do an American accent, and maybe they lose that part if they're playing an actual character from where they're from. But I also kind of feel like it's like, when we hear them talk in the movies, the accent's usually good, right? It's usually like, Scott Adkins does a pretty good American accent, and he seems to
yeah,
like doing an American accent. But when I think of a movie like the Debt Collectors films where he's playing a Brit, or Castle Falls where he's playing a Brit, and there's like an explanation of like, Castle Falls, that he was an MMA fighter who came to America to try to make it, and he's like living out of his car and everything like that. That to me feels more authentic than say like a lot of the Isaac Florentine movies where he plays an American, and you're just
yeah,
kind of like, well, why? He could just as easily have been a Brit in this role, and it would have made just as much sense.
yeah, definitely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Now, the one other thing I wanted to ask, kind of before we move on to the beyond the spoiler wall here, just in terms of like your writing for the film, and so you kind of develop out the script, and then you kind of start seeing it being shot. And one of the things that really struck me about this film is that as they're sort of building the tension between the two, especially the two main characters, Nathan and Nicolette's character, is that there are a lot of these sort of like not establishing shots, but it'd be like shots of like a teacup, like maybe a teacup in Nathan's hand with a half-eaten biscuit or something like that, that would just sort of like be spliced in amongst their conversation when they're sort of talking about whatever it is that they're saying, and we can feel that tension building up. I mean, as a writer, are you even thinking in terms of those kinds of scenes, or is it they kind of come organically as you're filming the different shots?
yeah. It's a bit of a mix, really. I mean, we were quite, we wanted to have a lot about kind of mannerisms, and uh someone might be is saying one thing with their dialogue, but really you want to give the impression that they're thinking something else. I mean, as much as possible, we didn't we kind of wanted to go, you follow by the rule of show don't tell. So there was an element of that, so we wanted the dialogue to be kind of interesting and not be too too much about driving the plot on and having big, huge amounts of exposition dumping. So yeah, there's certain things that probably do come quite naturally on set where an action with the teacup or whatever might be seem like an idea to put in. And again, other ideas that come maybe in the editing suite as well.
Yeah, because I felt like that really worked. I mean, one of the ones that, of course, was coming up a lot, and I don't know if maybe again if this was something that when you and Nathan were conceiving of this story or as you were writing the script, just like a lot of shots of the radio, just sort of by itself on the on the counter, and I don't know, I really love that because again, like you said, it could be an older radio. It could just be that it's an older radio in a more modern time, or it could be an older radio of its time. But also this idea that it's sort of this one conduit to the outside world and sort of the control that everybody's sort of trying to use over that radio.
Yeah. It was sort of that, but it was also because we crowdfunded the movie as well. Part of that was to have radio voices as like a perk. So we kind of filmed that as well because we were conscious of the fact that we might have voice actors having moments on the radio as well. But again, the other thing was we didn't want it to feel too shoehorned either. So again, like you say, that was our kind of thing as well, that it kind of feeds you a little bit from the outside world, but doesn't really go too far.
Yeah, it was almost kind of like thinking about Baby the Basket, where like Michaela Longden's character takes the boat back to the mainland, and it's almost like the radio was in a way kind of like the boat as this sort of like this little connection that like you could be outside of it. It was the only thing that was taking you outside of this little location.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we wanted to kind of have it feel closed off, but aware of something happening, beyond out in the wider world.
Yeah. I just really, and it just the shots of it, like these kind of I don't know if establishing shots the right word, but just sort of like as you're kind of moving between scenes, and there's a shot of the radio there, and and of course, the fact that we've got Nico's character listening to metal music, I thought was really cool. I mean, some of the songs were great. I think was one of them was kind of it was called "When Darkness Falls," right? One of the songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously a little reference there.
Yes, I love that. That's like an Easter egg. I think that's kind of the thing, right? When you've kind of developed a certain amount of movies. I mean, between ones that you've done, either with with Shogun films or with Cinderella's Revenge with Mark L. Lester, but now these movies that you've done with Nathan, where you guys have done a few at this point, to have those like little Easter eggs from previous movies is kind of fun. Like for people who've seen them all, right? You can get those little pieces, but like nobody would need to know that you've done When Darkness Falls to get it doesn't affect your ability to see the film if you don't know that the title of that song is based off one of your other movies.
Yeah, definitely. It's just a little moment of indulgence, really.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. Yeah. Well, at this point, I think what we'll do is we'll kind of take a break here to move on to the other side of the spoiler wall. But before we do, is there any other kind of general thoughts about the movie you wanted to mention, especially for people that haven't seen it yet and are hopefully going to stop listening right now and go watch the movie?
No, I just think they just as long as they give it a bit of due patience, then hopefully they'll enjoy what we've managed to do on a budget. But all particularly, from myself as a writer and a producer, is to see it kind of come to life, and that gives me pleasure as well in terms of what the cast did. They all did a really great job of bringing those characters to life and kind of adding extra layers that not even I had on there on the page, which that's always a pleasure really when they add an extra dimension to what I've written.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I was wondering about that actually myself, because I remember when we talked about Baby in the Basket, with there you had so many characters, and it felt like each actor that you brought onto the film was taking their own character and trying to run with it as much as they could. But in this case, right, maybe I'll talk with Nicolette McKeown at some point, and Stephen as well, and kind of see what they thought. But it feels like with this being more of a smaller scale or fewer characters, that there's more space, that I almost feel like that's even more of like a I don't know, an enticement for an actor to see that and be like, okay, this is how many pages I've got, and this is what I can do with this character.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine so. I'm sure they'll tell you and confirm that. But again, it's I have to sort of give them something interesting to do. So hopefully that was something that they responded well to as well.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it. So yeah, so what
Yeah,
we'll do here, we'll take a quick break here. People can hear an ad about one of my novels. But I want you to, if you haven't seen Death Among the Pines yet, go check it out for sure. And right now you can rent it on Amazon Prime here for I think $2.99 here in the States, which is not expensive. It's a great price. It's a great and also I think again supporting indie. I think it's important. But then come back here after you've seen it, and we can I'm going to ask Tom some questions about the production that would have spoilers. So again, if you haven't seen the movie yet, stop here, go watch the movie, and then come back here. Hopefully, Apple will have saved your progress at this point here. But yeah, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Check out my newest release, Nadia and Aiden, available now. Told in a unique dual first-person narration style, Nadia and Aiden explores what it means to be American from the standpoint of two kids who grew up in France with an American mother. It also looks at how we define family beyond DNA and blood relations, when life isn't always that simple. You can find Nadia and Aiden on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back. And so, yeah, these are some of the things I wanted to ask about the film. I think when you were on for Cinderella's Revenge, I was like so excited to talk about different things that I saw in the movie that I was going about it like kind of beginning to end and spoiling a lot of it. It was almost like people couldn't listen to the podcast at all. And so I was on the Lambcast podcast. We talked about Fantastic Four, and the host of that show, Richard Kirkham, he had it set up with this way where you talk about the movie in general to start, and then spoilers after what he called the spoiler wall. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So, when having you on here, I thought this would be a great idea to ask some of those questions that would spoil the movie, but I was really curious about.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
So I think the first thing for me is, here in Philadelphia, I mean, when people knock on the door here in Philadelphia, my wife and I actually kind of pretend we're not home a lot of the time. We kind of hide. We'll kind of maybe peek around the window to see who it is. We almost never answer the door unless we know who's on the other side. And I don't know, did you feel like, because obviously there's a whole place that this movie goes, and it explains why Nico's character would answer the door when a stranger with blood on his head and blood on his knuckles would knock on the door. We get into it at some point, but was there any concern that, I wonder if the audience is going to follow us with this, especially women in the audience in particular who might be like, boy, I don't know if I would answer the door for that guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the concerns that we had. But it's one of those things where, it's like a classic of I suppose the 90s pop boiler thriller. Is it? A lot of them start from these kind of moments where you could pick apart the logic. Part of it was, and again, this goes back to us wanting to make it a period set film as well. People were a little bit less guarded, I suppose. It's a constant joke now that people don't want to answer their door or
Right.
answer the phone. But back maybe in the 90s or slightly before then, people were maybe a little bit more trusting, I suppose.
No, that's a great point. I always
Yeah.
joke that the one app on my phone that I hate the most is the one that actually makes it a phone. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens is, I think the other thing about this dynamic that I think was interesting is that, so okay, throughout the entire film, we get this sense of who Nico's character is. We think that she's a certain person, and yes, there's breadcrumbs that come up at different points in the film. But one of the things that I think the two main characters, Nathan's character and Steven's character, they're kind of always acting as if Nico's character is what we think she is, right? It's just,
Yeah.
lonely woman at home who's maybe being taken advantage of or could be easily taken advantage of. And I mean, Nathan finds out at a certain point what the real deal is. And I guess actually Steven's character does find out as well. He does actually find out what the real deal is for him. But it is interesting, I think, that that dynamic where, and I almost think that this might also be a split between maybe male and female audiences. There's always this kind of this conversation about online dating where when they poll men and they say, what's the worst thing that could happen on an online date? They say, oh, well, or the worst fear you have. And it says, oh, she's not going to be good looking. When they ask women, they say, oh, the biggest fear is he's going to be a serial killer, right? Or he'll try to harm me. I think the other one is hiking. Women say they'd rather encounter a bear on hiking than just like a lone guy, you know.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder if like men seeing her answer the door and let Nathan in might not think as much of it as a woman might say. Oh, why would she do that? And the men almost still continue to have that mindset of like, oh well, she's just Steven's character calls her daft at certain points, that she just doesn't know what she's doing. And I kind of like that interplay where those two characters still always think they're in control throughout the film.
Yeah, I mean it's in a way they're both fairly sort of old school and misogynistic, and again that would be more so in a period set film, um, to have that kind of almost like a default mindset really, where effectively both of them have really they have no idea what they've kind of let themselves in for, in terms of Nico's character. And yeah, they do definitely underestimate her.
Yeah, and I mean Steven's character when he's introduced into the film, and again, he's it's this party crasher element, and I think what I loved was I think how Steven, and I'll ask when I get a chance to talk to him, I want to be able to ask him about this, that he as an actor himself, as a person playing the part, he knows his character is the party crasher, but the character himself doesn't know that, right? The character himself
Yeah.
thinks he's there to rescue this woman and potentially maybe hook up with her. I think he has a thing for her as well, and he's kind of almost like he knows her husband and knows okay, who she is, and I don't, I kind of love that element there of like, yeah, and almost like the competition between him and Nathan's character. Part of it is that Steven suspects he's a cop killer, and so he's that sort of policeman protecting their own. But almost like there's a sense of like, are they he wants to protect and maybe win over Nico's character Angela away from Nathan's character.
Yeah, certainly that's one of the dynamics in the film. It's that we wanted to have just this kind of interesting duality with all the characters where we're not quite sure of their motivations, and their motivations kind of naturally shift as the film shifts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest parts of the scene, the film for me, obviously, is the love scene, the love making scene, or the sex scene, because you really get a sense of who Nico's character is in that scene. But also with Nathan's character, you can tell he's lusted after her from the moment he's walked in the house, and he's wanted to
Yeah.
hook up with her, and now he feels like he's finally getting there. And then like what her concept of sex is something not what he's planning on, right? It's not what he was expecting, but he's like, I'm just so happy to be with her, I'm just going to go with it, right? This is just going to work for me. Maybe later on down the road I'll get what I want out of this baby or whatever, not knowing, right, not knowing that this is more who she is than just like this is how she wants to make love with him at this time.
Yeah, he has this interesting kind of moment where, yeah, he, like you say, he's kind of getting what he wants, what he's sort of lusted for, but also he has this moment where he kind of loses control and he realizes that he's not the one in control anymore. Um, and again, yeah, I mean, in terms of the scene itself, we were quite conscious we wanted to move it into that direction, and have a moment that would kind of maybe surprise or even kind of a little bit shock people. It's quite difficult to do because increasingly now mainstream films are quite extreme and shocking now. So you have things like Saltburn, for example, which had very kind of memorable scenes in terms of being quite shocking and to the point where they'd be discussed on the internet. So we're kind of competing now with the mainstream almost, whereas this used to be something that was more in kind of underground cinema. Um, so yeah, we were kind of wary of the fact we wanted to make something that was quite eye catching, um, without going too far, really, because we didn't want to have it just shock value for the sake of shock value.
No, because I think the reason why it works, and I think and the reason too why I think if you were making this as a '90s cable movie, and they would want you to do it in a completely different way, probably if you had Joan
Yeah,
Severance playing, Nico's character. But the way that this worked, I think, is that she takes complete control in a situation that Nathan thought he was controlling, right? Like he's,
yeah,
and I think that is something that when it comes to censors or it comes to, people, in terms of like what is considered, I don't know, okay, or aggressive or whatever, a woman who's sort of aggressively taking control in the bedroom like that, that is something that would have been off-putting, I think, for a lot of people. Like, oh, I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if we can have that in there. But there, like you said, there's nothing like exceedingly like bad, like there's nothing like gross or horror, it's like there's something like really extreme about it, except for the fact that it is a woman taking charge like this in the bedroom.
yeah, for sure. And I think also what it becomes also something where it reveals something about her character without having to say a lot as well. So it becomes almost in some ways another. I mean, it's another set piece in some ways because in these kind of films, you need interesting things to happen through the film. So there's a fight scene in the film a bit earlier on, and then you've got this scene as well. And we were quite we wanted to sort of have certain, I suppose, tropes that you would see in those kind of thrillers back in the 90s, particularly the ones that came out post sort of Basic Instinct. Um, but again, we didn't want it just to be gratuitous. We wanted it to say something about the character and something about the shifting dynamics.
Yeah, and I absolutely love the way that she went for it in that role. Like she kind of, like you said, it's not gratuitous. Like again, this is another thing with my low budget direct to video movies that I don't know how many times there would be a gratuitous scene where you listen to the director. Back when DVDs had all those directors producers commentaries where they'd be like, oh no, this was important for the character development. I'm like, I don't think so. I think we could have gotten along fine without that moment, but this was, and I think another layer to this scene that I thought was really important is that Steven's character is tied up in the basement down below them. And
Yeah,
he's hearing everything that's going on upstairs, but he thinks it's probably a more, Nathan taking charge, kind of a more, in his mind, traditional lovemaking moment where he's thinking essentially that Nathan's, say, for lack of a better word, conquering or getting her. That's what he thinks he's experiencing from downstairs where he can't see what's happening, which I thought was really interesting because in some ways, Steven's character could have been a conduit for us as the audience, right? We could have been like,
yeah,
you know, we're experiencing these two people and what they're going through. Steven's experiencing as well. He could have been that conduit, but the fact that there's that difference between what we see as the audience and what Steven's character experiences downstairs, I thought was a really great development because I think again, as the movie goes on and these characters start to interact with each other more, when Steven's character escapes, it informs his decisions in a way that's very different from what we are seeing on the ground.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, we just wanted to make it kind of interesting about the way these characters kind of interact with each other, and what they kind of give out to each other and what they hold back, and the way obviously that they interpret each other as well.
Yeah, and I thought that was really great. I mean, again, I think as we're starting to learn, like those breadcrumbs of flashbacks that you're giving us, and you're starting to give us more wider, more complete flashbacks, and we're starting to get a better sense of like who Nicolette's character is, who Angela is, what her experience was with her husband, all of those things. Yeah, it's sort of like us getting a better sense of it while Steven still has this idea of like, oh, she's the pretty wife of this guy who works on the boats that I've seen in town, and the fact that she's helping Nathan's character at points, well, she's just daft, and then he realizes it right when it's probably too late that he's been wrong about this whole thing the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, we wanted to kind of have that little the moment, the sort of rug pull for this character. I mean, they're all kind of like morally ambiguous, each character. Again, that was something we wanted to have as well. We didn't want to have someone, one character that might be explicitly, fully evil, or one character that's, goody two shoes. We wanted everyone to be sort of similarly, I suppose, human and rounded and morally ambiguous as well.
Yeah, now one of the things for me when I first watched them, when I watched the movie, there's the opening scene that sort of gives us a little bit of what could happen and what's going to happen later. We just don't know how we get there.
Yeah.
And the character who's running through the bog, who sees the body, the kind of the head in kind of coming up from the bog of the dead body. I thought that was Nathan's character. I thought it was Nathan playing that part to begin with, and then as the movie goes on, we discover that it's Steven actually. And I don't know if that was just me just seeing that it looked like it was Nathan's character. I mean, I guess we don't know who that person is anyway when we're seeing at the clip there, but I don't know if that was just me just happening to see that and thinking it was Nathan to start with.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want it to be too clear in that opening moment that who each person was. And again, Nico in the scene, we didn't really want to reveal her too much, so we wanted to keep that fairly ambiguous as well. But again, yeah, partly in that scene, that's almost kind of bowing slightly to the 2B trends, where you have to kind of start with some kind of, I suppose, action. In some respects, but yeah, I think it still works quite well. I mean, ordinarily I might have just started after that sequence, but yeah, you kind of have to get the audience attention from the beginning. So yeah, we wanted to keep it quite ambiguous and also kind of reveal a little bit about what's to come, but not too much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it's interesting. Talking about inspirations for this or things that for me that I saw in the movie. And I think I wanted to bring this up after the spoiler roll because I think some of these things beyond Hitchcock or 90s cable thriller that might give things away in the movie. But I also saw a tinge of like Hammer horror, but not like in like the sort of like the Christopher Lee's Dracula sense of Hammer horror that maybe like Baby in the Basket might have had sort of the remote locations, but kind of like something like a Die Die My Darling or something like that, where it's sort of this quaint location that's sort of out of the way, and a character shows up. And you could almost see, again, I always talk about Nathan's character being like Oliver Reed when we were talking about Baby in the Basket, but I always kind of see that here as well, that he shows up at a house and, he's we don't know what his motives are. And then it kind of all turns on him, and that location, everything, I could kind of see in my head, like kind of that 60s, I don't know if it was Kodak Eastman film that they used, but like that quality of film that they had where it was kind of a little bit washed out, but in my head, I could kind of see a lot of that. And the way that this plays out felt like one of those kind of movies as well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we were quite influenced by a few different things. That didn't sort of explicitly come to mind while I was writing it, but no doubt from watching films like that, it would have been slightly infused in me as well, because it's that combination of sort of Hitchcockian elements and the 90s sort of thrillers, like I said, but also in a distinctly kind of British way as well. So I suppose Hammer was fairly similar, where they might have been influenced slightly by certain American pictures at the time, or we wanted to have that kind of fusion of elements and make a kind of British thriller with a sort of style of the sort of American 90s thrillers as well.
Now, this other one I'm going to ask about, I think, gives away the movie, so I can't. So I didn't want to bring it up until after this. But it's a movie that Alain Delon and Jane Fonda did, Le Felon, or The Joy House. I don't know if you've seen that one, or if you've heard of that one.
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, so directed by Renee Clement, and I guess like the kind of the problematic element of it was that Jane Fonda said after she was really young when she made the movie that Renee Clement asked if he could have sex with her because he wanted to know what her orgasm was like for shooting the movie. So that was kind of a sideline, but essentially it's very similar to this movie. That Alain Delon, he is a criminal on the run. And he finds this house. So it's Jane Fonda and I think her mom, a character plays her mom. He goes and moves in with them. And there's sort of this like cat and mouse game between him and the two women. And at the end of the movie, essentially, like there's, I can't remember exactly how it played out, but the end of the movie, essentially the cops were looking for Alain Delon, and I think she like essentially tells the police that he's dead or something. And the movie ends with him being stuck in the attic, and he really can't leave the attic. He's kind of just there, trapped forever, as sort of like Jane Fonda's plaything in a way. And so I felt like there was a lot of symmetry with how this movie played out as well.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I mean, Yeah, there was quite a few other sort of movies that we had in mind as well. Obviously, Misery is one. Yeah, there's a certain, I suppose, Stephen Kingishness about the film as well, and also Death and the Maiden.
Yeah.
I think was an inspiration. I think that was Polanski, with Sigourney Weaver in as well, and Ben Kingsley. But there was a few that we kind of had as a reference point, and maybe some of the earlier Polanski thrillers as well. But that one, yeah, that does sound interesting. I'll have to give that one a look.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I feel bad because I gave you the end. I gave away the ending, but it's the way they go back and forth. I mean, like there's one scene in because it's in French, and so Jane Fonda is speaking French in it, and like there's one point where she tells Alain Delon's character "Je vous aime" as opposed to "Je t'aime." And I'd never seen it written like that before. It was one of those quirks of French that you can't do in American, or not, you can't do in English. Is that you know there's no, because everybody uses the formal you, right? You is the formal you. We don't use thou, or whatever. But it's one of those things that you can do in French that you can't do in English. Is have her use the formal version when she's telling somebody she loves them. And kind of the way that came off was just so, you get it kind of, it reinforced the power dynamic that wasn't really there, I guess. Like something that this movie you wouldn't be able to do with the language in exactly that same way that this movie, the Joy House did.
Yeah, I suppose that gives it its own unique quirk. So we're kind of hoping that we have our own, I suppose, idiosyncrasies as well with this one, with the Scottish setting and characters, and this kind of feeling of being a time of a generation or two before.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned the Stephen King element. So I grew up in Maine, so of course I know where Stephen King's from, and one of the things that Stephen King always developed really well was that in Maine is kind of similar to like these parts of Scotland here where they're very remote. You'd have streets that would go on for miles with no street lights even, so it's just your headlights that
Yeah,
would be powering it, and you drive and you might see somebody just walking. As you're on these roads here that are desolate. It's like, why is this person walking? Where are they going? What are they doing? Or you pass a house that just happens to be there. I remember my friend, we went kayaking with him. His family, they lived in one of those kind of houses that just kind of out in the nowhere. I think what they did for a living, his parents, I think they like tested soil for companies or things like they're like chemists or something. I don't know if that was their business, but you'd see these houses and there's like a sense of like, okay, when you get to the main highway or you get to a more populated area, it's like I made it, right? My car got me through. And Stephen King would always be like, okay, well, what happens if your car doesn't make it? And you have to go knocking on one of those doors.
yeah,
Or what if you live in one of those houses and somebody just knocks on your door at night? And the quaint beauty of Maine that's there during the day becomes very sinister at night. And he was someone who was able to mine that to, I'm nine figure estate, the money that he's been able to make off of just that element. And that was one thing I think this movie, I think you guys really tapped into well, is that Nico's character is just sitting on her couch. She doesn't have a TV, so she's like listening to the radio. I think she was reading, and there's a knock at the door. You could get that feel of like, oh, there's a knock at the door. But I also like the fact that we get a sense of her before there's a knock at the door. She's making her stew. She's
yeah,
kind of doing, so it's not like what's the old adage? You can't start a story with there's a knock at the door, right? Or the phone, the alarm goes off, whatever it is. We get that sense of her first, so that there's an interruption into her life. The way that Stephen King would make these kind of interruptions into people's everyday lives.
yeah. I mean that's exactly what we kind of wanted to have. We were, quite keen to have that kind of establishment where you get this sense of normality and just sort of everyday things, really, that she kind of likes peace and quiet, and just being in her own kind of space out in the middle of nowhere. But then we're feeding in these elements as the more that they engage after she's let him in, and then working in the aspect of the absent husband and things like that. And then obviously, yeah, by the time Stephen comes in and crashes the party, then the pace kind of really rockets, and we're learning more, like we're getting more little breadcrumbs constantly.
Yeah, I absolutely love that way that that worked, and I think again the tension between the two of them, between Nico's character and Nathan's character, it works so well. And I think that that moment where he goes upstairs and puts his puts on the husband's clothes. And he's kind of sitting there. I can't remember if the shirt was like a polo neck or a kind of a button-up shirt, but like with the pants with the checkered pattern on them, or the plaid pattern on them. And he felt like very much like a man of the house kind of thing. With drinking his whiskey, and she's there with him. And then when Steven shows up and he's kind of in this thing, and this, the veneer is so obvious, right, that it's not real. But the fact that there was that veneer there, I just thought, again, I really love that interplay. And again, like there's that moment where Steven's kind of just surveying the way a cop would, right? He's just looking around the house. Why people don't
Yeah.
like having police in their house, right? Because they just, they're looking at everything. And Nathan sees the photo of her with her husband, of Nico with her husband, and I love that he's like, well, I'm going to try to hide this photo. And it's like the cop has already seen it. He already knows it's there. He's the moment he sat down, he saw all of this stuff. And so like that kind of thing is so, like you said, it's very Hitchcockian. But also too, it's like this sort of this like taut veneer that was sort of being sort of this very tense moment here. But we kind of know as the audience that this taut tense moment is all going to fall apart. But while they're doing their interplay, Nico's character's just in the other room, like just kind of washing dishes or whatever it was that she was doing just in the kitchen, not really paying attention to, or not, I shouldn't say she was paying attention. She just didn't seem like she cared as much about what was happening. And we kind of find out why that is later.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted these interesting moments between characters and this tension rising. But we really, in terms of Nico's character, she's sort of key in the film in terms of just the way her character develops, and the more you kind of see about her, and the more kind of that you might question some of her behavior and how that kind of gets resolved as the film goes, particularly towards the final third, when you kind of realize why she behaves in the way that she does. And again, I think Nico really brought that out really well in terms of the layers to the character, because you have to kind of suggest that this in the you can't pull it out from thin air. So she did a great job of kind of teasing a little bit in her performance earlier on, where you might be thinking, well, that's a little bit sort of strange, her behavior, but then obviously it comes around and kind of gets resolved towards the end, and you kind of realize, okay, now I see it.
Yeah, because one of the things I was going to ask you about, actually, this is actually good because again, I wanted to bring it up here on the other side of the spoiler, but in a movie like this, usually Nico's character would be going through like a kind of a development throughout the film, where maybe she's meek and lonely, and then finds her strength and all this stuff. But actually, her character is more of like a revelatory character as opposed to a development or growing character, right? Like she's fully formed as she is, and then from your storytelling and her acting, you're revealing more of who she is as the movie goes on. And so I think it's part of the best part of the twist in this is that instead of us saying like, oh, she's going to find her strength to like defeat these two guys, we realize that like, no, she's not finding her strength. She is like sort of spun this web, and she is sort of it's revealed that she was always the strongest character all along, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we kind of wanted to give the suggestion that Nathan's character is kind of one of a long line where she's got this, I suppose it's almost like a slightly playful side, or almost like an indulgence, or I suppose maybe a fetish on her part, where she just likes having this control and being able to sort of quietly manipulate people, maybe make them think one way before kind of revealing something else. So she's kind of left, as we suggest a little bit with some visual cues, she suggests sort of a kind of a line of victims, I suppose, a Black Widow kind of character.
Well, because the best breadcrumb comes early in the film when Nathan's, he's wet from being outside in the rain, and she's like, well, I could give you some dry clothes. And he's like, well, I don't know if I'll be your husband's size. And she goes, well, I've actually got a few different sizes. And you don't think anything of it at the time. You think, well, maybe the husband, he grew and lost weight, or maybe you don't know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
But then when the movie, gets to the end, you're like, okay, I know what she meant now when she said I've got a few different sizes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we wanted to have these little moments, like little setups and payoffs, and kind of work these things into. Partly it's because it shows that we've given it some thought, and we want to kind of lay some clues and little Easter eggs, so that once you know all the twists, if you go back and watch it again, you'll kind of start to spot things or notice like little, I suppose, slips of the tongue, or what you might assume is a slip of the tongue in some of the dialogue.
Well, because to your point, what we were talking about earlier, if I'm scrolling on
Yeah,
my phone to see like what other films Nico's been in, while that happens, I might miss that line entirely. And then later on, when it's revealed what she meant when she said, "I've got a few different sizes of clothes," you should be okay to find something to wear, right? Like that, I would have missed it altogether, and then it wouldn't have, and again, it would have been another layer of the movie. I mean, again, between the breadcrumbs from the flashbacks that we were getting, these sort of little dialogue flashbacks here and there, I thought were really fantastic.
yeah. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, to pull off with flashbacks, because sometimes you can be a bit overly reliant on them. Sometimes they can almost be a slightly lazy kind of moment of exposition. So we kind of wanted to keep a level of ambiguity to some of them and make them feel like an essential little moment of the story that we flesh out. And again, it also allowed us to have these moments, particularly with Nathan's character, kind of insights into how he got into that position. So that we have a couple of action scenes in the film as well, and that they're in there without feeling too forced, I hope.
No, because I think this is a really important point. Because I think so many movies. So like, this is thinking about, like you said, like okay, this felt like this is going to be a simpler film to pull off because it's only a few actors in a very one location. I mean, I think of Randall Emmett is always looking for scripts like that, right? Like, okay,
Yeah,
this movie is just going to take place in this casino. It's just going to take place in an armored car, right? For the Armor movie with Stallone and everybody, and he's very keen on using the flashbacks as padding to sort of pad the film out. And it's very clear those flashbacks are there to pad. And
yeah,
I think what you do here,
yeah,
though, with the flashbacks is much more organic and much better equipped for the story, where it's like, okay, we get one sense of we get this glimpse of Nico's life with her husband, and we think we understand that in a certain way, right? And I think there's maybe this stereotype too of the big, British longshoreman kind of person who is going to drink a lot and maybe be abusive to their spouse, and we've seen that character in a lot of depictions. So when we get that first glimpse of their relationship, we think that's what's going on, and it's just enough of a moment there to say, okay, this is what Nico's going through. This is who she is. This might be why she let Nathan in the house, right? That could be what's going on. And then later on, you give us a little bit more of the flashback. And then eventually you give us the whole thing. And so it's not padding the movie out. It's an organic way to reveal more of who Nico is, so that when we get to the end there, and I just thought that was a really great way to approach that.
yeah. I mean, that was our hope really with it, to have these flashbacks in there, and them to be organic and not feel too forced. And again, we wanted to keep them largely quite visual as well, so that they're not kind of sometimes you'll see in a lot of these films flashbacks where they'll flashback and all it is just big exposition dumps.
Right.
Obviously this isn't like a hugely narrative driven film in the same way like a spy thriller might be, but we still wanted to kind of have a little bit of ambiguity to those flashbacks. Certainly when there's action, it's to kind of propel the pace of the film as well. But yeah, in terms of Nico's flashbacks, we wanted to kind of slowly drip feed this little look into her relationship with her husband, and kind of take that in an unexpected place that surprises people.
Yeah, and to your point about Nathan, because you do the same technique with Nathan's flashbacks, and the way that you depict the interaction where he gets into trouble, the thing that gets him,
Yeah.
at first it feels like he's like a cold-blooded killer who just takes some guy out, and then we find out that no, he was in a situation where he had to act and defend himself. The police situation, I mean, that's extremely believable, right? Where he's, in the back of the van, he's about to be taken to the station, and the police officer starts like going through his wallet and taking his money and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, we have no sympathy, right, for that police officer there, So, I think all of that stuff, again, it worked really well because, again, I guess, to your point, I was maybe focusing a lot on Nico's Angela character and the way that the flashbacks revealed more about her as the story goes on. But to your point, it does the same thing with Nathan's character too, where is this guy a cold-blooded killer? Is he just here to is it the kind of Mickey Rourke in one of these kind of movies where he's just, there and we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then
Yeah.
as the flashbacks go on and we realize that, yes, the other shoe drops, but it's not the shoe we were expecting. I really like the way that the flashbacks played a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to do it in a way that, I guess, added surprises, and not just do, just spell something out and then that's the flashback done with. So, it performs a function in terms of, in Nathan's case, it gives us a bit of action in the film to keep the thing, propulsive. But again, it reveals some character as well, which is like, it's the key thing really with using those flashbacks.
Yeah, and I think also too, as we were talking about earlier, I think between the flashbacks and then the introduction of Steven's character, I think it all does a great job of like, before things got old between Nathan and Nico's characters, where they're kind of interacting and we're trying to wonder when something's going to happen between the two of them. And I think what I loved was that before anything happens between the two of them, Steven shows up. But we're also getting these flashbacks at the same time that I think also helped with that, where it was like, before anything got old between them and we needed something to happen, we were getting things before that. And the flashbacks were part of that, where we're okay. Oh, this is Nico's motivation. Oh, actually, no, it's not her motivation. Or this is Nathan's motivation. Oh, maybe it's not actually. And I think to your point about flashbacks being more of a padding device in some films, I thought you did a great job of using them here in a way to sort of, before anything got stale between Nico and Nathan's characters, just inserting, like you said, inserting a little more action or more tension there.
Yeah, definitely. It's a difficult balance to find, really, because you want to start off quite high paced and get your audience's attention, but you have to keep giving them something that will keep them paying attention, really. So the action can be a good way of doing that, but then also adding the intrigue as well, and adding these nuggets of the flashback with Nathan's character and the flashbacks with Nico's, because it all imparts on what happens in the final third as well. So we're learning a little bit more about them, but then there's still surprises as we learn more.
Yeah, and to your point, like, it's not padding in the sense that, because it's important to their character arcs that we know
Yeah.
these things. Because again, yeah, I get, I didn't Nathan's character is interesting because he does go through a little bit more of a development phase where he's kind of sort of trying to figure what he's going to do in his situation, and and he thinks he's got it sorted, he thinks he's got it figured out, and then realizes obviously who Nico's character is, and suddenly he realizes he's kind of stuck. But again, like with Nico's character, and again, I'll have to ask her in terms of acting that character. The fact that, like, when you read the story and she's a certain person and she doesn't really, I would say develop, right? She doesn't sort of go through any kind of progression or anything. She's who she is, and we learn who she is more. It's sort of like these little pieces that we get throughout the way. And I think, again, the flashbacks are part of that, where it's like, oh, okay, no, she's not trying to build her strength. She's already that strong. And here's this big, huge man, her husband, who's like crying and like getting sick in the bathroom because he can't do what she wants him to do, which she's essentially trying to force him to do. He can't be that husband to her that she's expecting. it sort of changes the whole dynamic of the film when we get that one moment, and it comes kind of at a really great time in the film where we're starting to get these breadcrumbs where we're getting a sense that Nico might not be who we think she is. So when we get that moment, it's kind of like, okay, now when she starts wielding an axe at Steven doing all this other stuff, it all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's again, we've always quite liked, in terms of all the films we've done so far, myself and Nathan, is build up. So you build this and you start weaving the story together, and then ultimately you want the payoff to work. So that's a big part of how we've kind of structured this and kind of had the characters interacting.
Yeah, and I think, again, going back to When Darkness Falls and where this one differs, and differs in a way that I actually really liked, was that When Darkness Falls is kind of more of a traditional, young woman, kind of up against a lot of, difficult odds, who sort of overcomes these odds and becomes the last person
Yeah,
standing at the end. That's kind of the more traditional. That's, I think, when you watch this movie, you this is what you think is happening going in. That this is, I'm getting something similar to When Darkness Falls. That Angela's going to find her strength and be the last woman standing at the end, and that these other guys that are trying to prey upon her are going to die the same way that in When Darkness Falls. And now, granted, there were some things you did in When Darkness Falls that I really liked, like with where Nathan's character is a predatory character, and then he's kind of, Longden's character's got to kind of team up with him at certain points. There's some really good parts of it that I like there, but it is more traditional in that sense of, like, the character's arc. And I love the way you played upon the audience thinking that's going to be the arc for Nico's character too. And so when that twist comes at the end, or not, it actually kind of comes as the movie's going on in the third act. It's such an interesting twist, and it makes, like I said, it makes kind of so much that you'd seen before that all makes sense.
yeah. I mean, we hope people have the same response, really, or at least appreciate what we've tried to put into the film. Um, yeah, it was definitely, I mean, we were actively, although we wanted to kind of step back into the thriller sort of realm again, do something like that with some of the same kind of inspiration points, really, to When Darkness Falls. We wanted to, again, do something quite different at the same time. And, the major part in there, like you say, is Nico's character, compared to, yeah, Michaela Longden, who's maybe the more traditional sort of female hero.
Yeah, and she worked really well in that part. I think it was really great
Yeah.
the way that came off. But I love kind of the way that it was subverted here. That our expectations are subverted here. And again, it is one of those things, I think, kind of similar to When Darkness Falls, where the audience, that one was more of a slow burn, I think, When Darkness Falls. And so as the audience, you kind of got to trust that you're gonna get there, but you kind of appreciate some of the things that you've seen to that point, and and then the payoff is worth it, right? Your trust is rewarded there. I almost feel like with this one, once you get past her letting Nathan in, and then again, like to your point, like from a Stephen King standpoint, that's kind of a thing that would happen a lot in his works. Once you get past that point, I think you're rewarded almost right away between the interplay between the two of them. It's tense, and you already get a sense, like you said, with those breadcrumbs from Nico that you are kind of placing there at certain points. There's just little things that she does. I mean, when she offers him a whiskey, and so they're both drinking it, and she's like ready for another one, and he's like, "I need to take a seat. This is a little strong, this whiskey." It's like these little pieces that happen in the movie. And you're like, like the joke, right? She tells the joke about, was it the rabbi, the lawyer, and the priest, about I think it was like a sinking ship, right? And getting the children off the boat. That they're like these little moments, and depending on and when you're Nathan's character or you're Steven's character and these moments happen, you think, okay, well, it's just a quirk that she has. It's just, she's
Yeah.
kind of she's an interesting woman, and I find that more endearing about her. Maybe that's kind of the mindset. But for us as the audience, it's like a little bit more of a tell each time something like that happens.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, she's kind of meant to be this Black Widow sort of character, all, a little bit sort of unhinged. So we wanted to kind of give enough that by the time you get there to get that full reveal, it doesn't come out of the blue. So it's just, layering in these little nuggets and little Easter eggs. And again, it's just important that Nico kind of brought that to the character. And, she really did. She did a great job.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, what I'll ask you, because I know obviously when you're shooting a movie, right, you don't shoot it linearly, right? You shoot it in different
Yeah.
parts here and there. And I know I was reading about the actors who work on The Bear, the FX TV show, because they shot seasons 3 and 4 together at the same time, and they would have to think like, oh, I'm at this point of my character's arc in the middle of season 4. But now I'm shooting the beginning of season 3, where they're in a completely different place. But again, with Nico's character, like when she's shooting these scenes, she has to think about like, well, what has been revealed about me to this point, as opposed to, what have I been through at this point, which feels like it could be a slightly different challenge when you're acting out the scenes.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite challenging to do. I think, one of the things is that her character, certain things that she might do at the end of the movie, that's part of her character. So it kind of has to be there at the beginning of the movie. So if she's filmed the beginning, last day, for example, then, she still has to kind of inject a little bit of what's going to come, just enough that you might sort, watching it chronologically, you might think, well, that's a little bit strange. Why is she acting like that? But then obviously by the end, you kind of see why. So that kind of has to be there at the beginning. So yeah, it must be a challenge kind of doing things out of sequence and kind of deciding on how much you put in and how much you hold back. And again, that becomes a challenge for Nathan, who edited the film as well, in terms of like, how much do I put in? Do I put the take that's been dialed up to a 7, or do I do one that's, a 4 or 5? Just finding that balance there as well.
Yeah, I can imagine, because again, like, talking about When Darkness Falls with Michaela Longden's character, where she, in her mind, when she's acting, she would be like, okay, my character has been through this at this point.
Yeah.
So this is who she is. So this is who she is now, and so she can say that, okay, that's who she is now because she's been through all this. Whereas, like, like you said with Nico's character, it's how much do I reveal in my performance here, and that I never thought about that other part of it. That Nathan, in taking the different cuts, would say, okay, I'm going to go with this maybe more muted cut, or this maybe more, maybe a little bit more revelatory cut, because I think this is a good place to reveal this here.
Yeah, it's just, like with movie making in each department coming together in unison, really. It's just finding that balance of what you want to put on screen. It's nice, as for me as a writer, to kind of watch a cut and be surprised. I mean, for Nathan as an editor, it must, because he, as the director, actor, and editor, by the time he's maybe had his third or fourth pass at the cut, he probably hates the film. Um, so you kind of have to get, I mean, I'm similar, I suppose, when I'm writing it. If I get to sort of draft 3 or 4, I might, by the final draft, I might sort of hate it as well. So it's, finding that balance. But then, I mean, the good thing is, I mean, Nathan probably experienced this a bit. I mean, he said as much anyway, that you get to a point where you watch it again, maybe fresh-eyed, and you start to think, well, actually, yeah, I'm quite happy with how that's come together. For me, kind of watching it, when I get to see these films, first time, it's like watching it fresh as a viewer. So I get to appreciate things that I've done myself, or decisions that I might have been slightly on the fence with, and see that they've kind of come off and they work well, or more, or maybe work better than I suspected. I think the biggest thing for me really is that when I watch something that I've written, then it's been, shot and cut and acted, if I feel surprised and I feel like certain things are unexpected, that's a real joy for me, because it becomes in some ways a different film than what I envisioned originally.
Yeah, and I wonder too, because with this is being maybe a little different than, say, like maybe some of your script for hire kind of things, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
you send it off to the company, and they say, oh, you know what, you had 2 couples, we're going to make it 4 women, because we think it's, and they maybe slap Amityville on the title, or Jurassic or something, and you didn't intend for that, but it comes up kind of different.
Yeah.
In this case, as being part of the production, and you're working on the story with Nathan, when it's a little bit different, because you get to see like, okay, I wrote this scene for Nico. But now look at what she's doing with it. It's something I didn't even expect to go in that place, but I like it that way. I mean, were there moments like that where you were like, oh yeah, I didn't think of doing it that way, but that's not how I intended. But I like it the way she did it.
Yeah, there was quite a few. I mean, even in like some of the way that she played it, and I didn't necessarily think of this in terms of like the first flashbacks, but and again, Ollie did this as well. Ollie Bassi, who plays the husband,
Oh, yes, yeah,
he kind of had this as well, where it didn't necessarily dawn on me while writing it at first that there should be a slight sense of artifice about their performances, but there is just that like underlying performativeness where it's quite acty, and that's important in the film because basically, as it kind of gets revealed later, they're both playing parts. So it's not a natural kind of husband-wife scene. It's kind of like this dynamic that's put on and quite performative. So that kind of comes through more than maybe I even envisioned when first writing. And again, all credit to Nico and Ollie for that. And again, Stephen, when he comes into the film, um, he plays it very much as I kind of intended, but it's good to see it kind of come off the page and be brought to life. Um, yeah, and he did a good job too. I mean, he's already worked with Nathan on another film, so it felt natural that we when we went to him that we could rely on him. We knew what he would bring to it, and then we were quite keen to work with Nico as well because we were kind of aware of the things that she was doing up in Scotland as well. Um, so we were quite interested to work with her because again, um, sometimes you kind of start initially thinking, well, shall we go back to certain actors and use them again? Almost becoming like a cycle of, like Ingmar Bergman always working with Max von Sydow,
right.
which, it has its benefits because, you know if you can rely on someone just from the practicality of shooting the film, that's a real bonus. But yeah, you don't want to get too kind of stale with people. So we used it as an opportunity to have a little bit of a stopgap. Nathan hadn't overused Stephen, I suppose, whereas Michaela and El O'Hara we've kind of used in 2 films. So it was time to give them a little bit of a break, and we pulled the cast together. And again, it's one of these films where you've got 4 key actors and everyone kind of has to be on it and be kind of interesting on screen. So it's difficult, but thankfully everyone kind of nailed the role. And for Nathan, obviously, because he has a key part to play in developing the story initially, he kind of knows what kind of character he wants to play, where he can step away and be a bit different to what he's done before as well.
Yeah, no, that this is a really great point because I with Ollie Bassi in particular, I never even thought to bring that, again, him being kind of this big Scottish guy that he's probably used to playing a certain part that is the part we were expecting him to play in this movie.
Yeah,
And then he reads the script and sees, oh, I get to play this other part, right? I get to do a twist on that part. And he's probably used to being typecast as like kind of the big, sort of maybe abusive or kind of big, the guy in the pub who gets drunk and starts breaking things or whatever it is that, that they put him in. And he gets to do a twist on that role. And like you said, the way that he and Nico play it, especially when it starts to get revealed more and more. And I never even considered that he's also playing a revelatory part, right? That he's,
yeah,
he's expected to be a certain thing to start with, and as the movie goes on, he's also giving us more and more bits of who he really is. And I never even considered, because again, I was kind of more focused, like you said, on the kind of the three main characters. But his part in the movie is just as key because we don't really get the full sense of who Nico is. I mean, the fact that she can make a man that big cry and get sick, and at some point in the film really gives you a sense of who she is too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we wanted to make these characters quite rounded and interesting. And again, that's quite a challenge to do in a film where we were intending to go out and do something that's, comfortably under 90 minutes. because myself and Nathan, we like doing slow burn films, but it can become a bit of a criticism sometimes where a film, if it's sort of 1 hour 40 or pushing 2 hours, um, that becomes a consistent criticism in some films. I mean, sometimes it's not warranted, or we feel like it's not warranted to be that critical of it, because people aren't maybe giving a film the attention it probably warrants. But this one, we were quite intent on doing something that was more fast paced. And again, because it's all confined into one location, it's a sort of chamber piece. We didn't want it to have these lulls and drops in pace. So, yeah, we were quite keen to make it quite fast paced, but at the same time, do something interesting with all the characters.
Yeah, and I think like think about that criticism, because I'm always making that criticism of movies, right? That if it's over 100 minutes, I always see it as after 90 minutes, it's borrowed time. That's sort of my mindset on it. But I think
Yeah.
again with like for example, Baby in the Basket, I think comes in at right around 100 minutes, and I think because you've got so many characters in that have their own arcs that are interesting, it doesn't really feel like it's long, or like when Darkness Falls is like, I think it's like 105. But again, with the arcs and the way things are moving in the story, I think it works in that sense. I think for me, when it gets over 100, I always look at it as like, is there something that could have been trimmed? A lot of times that's usually what I see. And it's sometimes as a filmmaker, I
Yeah.
can understand. I mean, me writing my novels, I attend a writers group here in Philadelphia, and the guy who runs is always saying like, oh, short chapters are in. Everybody does short chapters. And it's like one of my books is like 150,000 words in 5 chapters, and it's like, that's, because it's just how I wanted to write it. That's how it came out. But I think sometimes a movie, right, I think 100 minutes works, or 105 minutes, or even 2 hours. It works as long as everybody is, as long as the stories keep moving, in an organic way. And I think maybe for this movie, A Death Among the Pines, it might have been a stretch to get over 100 minutes because you had so few characters. And it's like kind of an organic 90 minutes that it feels like it belongs there. I think like for action movies, those are kind of things where it's like, what are we doing over 100 minutes? Because you've got to have, with an action movie, you've got to have an action piece every 10 to 15 minutes for it to work. And if you go long stretches without action, it's hard to do it. A movie like this, like there's action, even if it's not like physical action, in the moments where Nathan and Nico's characters are interacting, I feel like there's action there because at least it's holding my attention. And, I want to know what's going to happen with those characters. So, I think in that sense, and that was something that, When Darkness Falls had a lot of that, where what's going to happen between these characters, that you could do it over 100 minutes if it's got that kind of feel to it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I never felt there was a problem with, myself with Baby in the Basket. Obviously, I'm a bit biased,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, it was just that thing where we decided we wanted to have a bit of a shift, not necessarily because we didn't want to do too many sort of slow burns anymore, but that we wanted to do something where we felt it would be like quite quick paced. So yeah, that was our main sort of reasoning behind it. But again, we didn't want it to feel like it was rushing things or it was lacking in any sort of character. So we're hoping we kind of pulled that off.
Yeah, and I think again I think it's a combination of the fact that you have a smaller cast, so it's easier to
Yeah.
develop those characters. And again, the way that the flashbacks were used again, even I wasn't thinking about Ollie Bassey's character, but now as we're talking about it, the way he's developed when he's just in flashbacks, I think works really well in developing that. And again, it also, I think when you're working on a 90-minute time frame with a small number of characters, the way that the characters sort of develop each other, I guess, or maybe inform each other for the audience, where you can sort of learn more about certain characters and how they interact with the characters in the scene. I think that's always a great use of time. And I think it's it's almost like you don't feel like there's any scenes that are being wasted. Like they all seem to have a point in moving the film forward.
Yeah, definitely. That was always our intent.
Now, one question I have, and I saved it for the spoiler bit, just because if it did actually impact the way the story went, or if it was just a throwaway thing and didn't, I just wanted to be on the safe side and have it here. But there's a point where Nathan and Nico's characters are just getting to know each other, right? So Nathan's just come inside, he's drinking his tea, having his biscuit, and he's like, you don't have a telly? And she's like, no, I don't. And she's like, okay, well, what was on the news today? What'd you say? And she goes, oh, Celtic won. And I know like there's sort of that rivalry between Celtic and Rangers. I wasn't sure if there was any significance in the fact that she said Celtic and not Rangers or another team.
No, not especially. I mean, I'm not a huge Scottish football fan, but if I had to pick one between the two, sorry, Rangers fans,
Right.
it would be Celtic. Just because, yeah, my club is an English club called Aston Villa,
Oh, yes.
and we've had a few players over the years that have gone over to Celtic, and we've also had, obviously, quite a famous manager, Martin O'Neill, came over from Celtic, and Stilian Petrov was a former Celtic player, came to us. So it's that really that it's probably my favourite Scottish club.
Okay, perfect. Well, I wanted to
I
ask you.
probably just made a load of enemies there.
Right, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, it's funny. So my club in the Premier League is Arsenal because when the '94 World Cup was here in America, Dennis Bergkamp, he played in New England. The Dutch team was kind of stationed in New England, so I got to see him on TV a lot. And so when the World Cup was done, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get into world football now. I was like, well, who does Dennis Bergkamp play for? Oh, he plays for Arsenal. So that's how I became an Arsenal fan. But I remember Arsenal beat Celtic in like an opener for the Champions League because I think Arsenal had finished like fourth in the league that year, so they had to play an opening round, and so they beat Celtic. And there was where I lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, there was a English themed pub that in the area, and they would play Premier League games on Saturday morning. So you'd go in and get something to eat and drink or whatever. And somebody showed up that was he was an American as well, but he was a Celtic fan. And he was like, I knew there was going to be one of you Arsenal fans here when I came today. It was like, so I always remember that. Yeah. I mean, for me, the thing with Rangers was I used to play FIFA, one of the old iterations of the FIFA video game when I was in college. And I think Rangers had a couple players maybe that went to Arsenal or went to other teams that I knew of. So I picked Rangers, and I ended up winning the Champions League with them and all that. So I may be making enemies too with the people who are happy that you're a Celtic fan, saying that I was winning the Champions League with Rangers. Probably would be anathema to them too.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. That's one of the biggest rivalries probably in world football.
Yes. Yes, yeah. It's funny with Villa. I always remember because I remember when Martin O'Neill was the manager for them, and I again as an Arsenal fan, now they're doing well, but I remember there was that period when Abramovich bought Chelsea, and then the Liverpool was pumping more money, and then of course there's a lot of Emirati money going into Man City, and Arsenal just wasn't really doing spending on that level, and they were kind of starting to fall back. And it was teams like Villa that were like Everton would have been another one that they were like they would have trouble with, that they used to do okay, if they're on the road they might get a draw, and if they were at home they might eke out a win, but you'd start to see when you started to see them losing to those teams, it was kind of like, okay, Arsenal's kind of they're kind of falling more into the middle there than where they were.
Yeah I mean, those are the moments I've enjoyed as a Villa fan, is to the ups, and we're kind of in one at the moment.
Right.
So, but as I've known as being a fan for a long time, there's always ups and downs.
Yeah.
So I'll enjoy the ups while they happen.
Yes, exactly.
Similar to the film career, really, I suppose.
Yes, no, exactly. And I mean, that's the one thing I guess too when when it comes to sports, and this is something I've always learned with sports, is that I remember when I was in college, the school I went to, the University of Maine, they beat the University of New Hampshire in the hockey championship. And so that, I lived more near where the University of New Hampshire was when I was home for the summer. And I remember I'd see people who went to UNH, and I'd brag about, my team winning the championship. And my sister was like, but you didn't do anything. You weren't a part of it. Why are you bragging? Like you didn't play. And it kind of stuck with me. And then in 2004, I had gotten accepted to I was applying to graduate school again at the University of New Hampshire, actually, and I had split a case of wine with a friend of mine, and because it was like a deal on French wine, and I got a bottle of Moet Chandon, and I was going to open it when I got into graduate school. That was the whole idea. And then my baseball team, the Red Sox, they won their first World Series since in 86 years, and I was getting ready to open it. I was like, but that's their accomplishment. Like I'm excited that they won, and and I guess maybe too for you, making movies, it's like if Villa won the Premier League or did something big like that, you'd be excited. But like you can look at something like Death Among the Pines and be like, that's my accomplishment. Like I did that. That's the thing that I can celebrate, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean it's nice to get kind of positives, particularly when you've produced it yourself. So in terms of the films that I've done with Nathan, and also another one that I produced by myself, uh, it's just, it feels a bit of an accomplishment. When you kind of, any film getting made is kind of a miracle anyway
Right.
in itself. But yeah, when it comes out, if it gets a nice response, or you get these things like the DVD, if you get a DVD come out as well, that's always a bonus and a nice thing to have. um so yeah, we've had some nice moments along the way. It's been stressful, but it's nice to have those moments where you think that it's worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is the fifth movie of yours that you've come on to talk about. I think so. We've done, When Darkness Falls, Baby the Basket, Cinderella's Revenge, Nemesis, or sorry, Renegades, and so now this film, I think, is the fifth one. So I mean, and all really great ones. I think, I think for people listening out there, this is the one to see right now. But after, go back, and if you haven't seen some of those other ones, they're all really really great movies.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably they're my top five in terms of what I've done.
Yeah, and I had the good fortune of being able to see Cinderella's Revenge in the theater here, in the Philadelphia area, which was kind of a really cool experience to be like, oh, I saw your name across the street. I was like, oh, there he is. We'll be talking about this movie soon. But yeah, I mean, this one here for me, I think it's right up there. I think, for people listening, and I guess at this point I shouldn't be telling them to go watch it because they should have already seen it because we're on the spoiler side of it. But hopefully in this part of the movie,
Yeah.
You're getting some insight into some things that you were maybe had questions about. Hopefully I was able to kind of ask, because again, there was a lot of things as I was watching. I was like, oh, I'm be curious to ask Tom about some of those things. And so, but again, I want to make sure I asked about them here, because I didn't want to spoil anything, because I think there's so many good twists in this movie that to be able to kind of catch it organically and not be spoiled, I think makes it work so much better.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we're kind of in a generation now where even in big studio trailers, they don't really care too much about giving away big spoilers. But I like the old-fashioned way of going into a film quite blind and being really surprised by what you see, really. So, yeah, I'm hoping that people maybe flick across it, have no idea what they're in for. Maybe the title is evocative. Maybe the artwork strikes them, and they kind of get surprised by it.
Yeah, I really love that this plays on an understanding of, like, these damsel in distress, women sort of growing through the experience, or kind of thing, that, like, you go in thinking that's what you're going to get, and then when you get something completely different, but something that completely different, that works organically, again, that, like, I'm when the twists come, I'm not like, well, that doesn't sound right, that wouldn't, I don't believe her doing that, like, the thing I don't believe her doing is answering the door. That's the thing I don't believe. And then as the movie goes on, it's like, of course she answered the door, right? Like, she was just, right, like of course,
Yeah,
the moment he came to the door, she was like, huh, this could have potential, like, that, I think that was, like, the best part for me, was that it played on I don't know if tropes is the right word, but it played on sort of traditions in this kind
yeah.
of movie, to make you think you're watching one thing, and then as the breadcrumbs are revealed, as they're bigger moments, you discover that, no, this is not the movie you thought it was going in. And I think, again, between your writing and, Nathan's direction and editing and the acting, all of the parts that people played, it all came together to make something really really spectacular that I just really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's good. That's great to hear. I mean, that's what we all set out to do, and we just hope that we can kind of pull it off and get, a vision that we really intended to get. We just hope people are kind of patient with it, because we're unfortunately in a slightly impatient generation. Not in terms of like an age generation, but just in terms of the way the world is at the moment, where people don't always pay attention. So yeah, we're hoping that people don't just, as soon as Nathan knocks on the door and she lets him in, just sort of switch off, and it's like, nah. So yeah, stick with it, and you'll be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from the moment he comes, I mean, yes, it's like, I trusted, because I was like, well, why did she let him in? I kind of want to know what's going on with her, right? That she would do this.
Yeah,
But the interactions they have from the beginning, and again, the way that you wrote them and that they're acted, where it feels like it's something. We feel like we're watching something we recognize, and we just kind of want to see how it plays out. Um, I really appreciated that because I think again the way Nathan and Nico play their parts to start with, and the way that they're kind of going back and forth with each other, it's almost like they kind of understand what we think we're watching, and while they're giving us little moments where we say, "Oh, maybe that's not quite exactly what I would expect there," or "That's not exactly what I would be thinking that they would do," they do a great job of making us think we're going to be seeing something, and then later on when
Yeah,
it starts to change, yeah, it all works so well.
yeah. Well, we hope so.
Very well, Tom, as we're wrapping up here, anything else that you wanted to say about the film?
No, we're. It's been a bit of like any making any film. It's a hard process. There's always kind of stumbling blocks. It took us so long to find the right location, to figure out the right time of year to film it. It was originally actually going to be called Death Among the Barley, but because we had a time scale in mind of when we had a gap to film something, that didn't coincide with barley being in full bloom. So it then became where we're going to have to change it to Pines. But actually, in hindsight, I think that's a better title because it just feels a little bit more evocative of a thriller. Whereas Death Among the Barley is a nice title, but it feels almost a bit ambiguous, like it could be an art house film of some kind, or like a Bergman-esque, rumination on depression or something. So yeah, I think some things happen for a reason, but it's nice to kind of wake up one morning, the film's complete, done, and then you're happy with it after all the sort of the dramas that go into making it.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I will say about that title, I think if you had gone with Death Among the Barley, it would have given away the film more as the movie was going on. Because when we start to get those moments where she talks about the barley field, she talks about putting barley in the stew and all of those
Yeah,
kinds of things, I think that would have given it away sooner for me, as opposed to Death Among the Pines, which keeps it a little bit more like, who is doing this, right? Who are the people that are committing these murders or whatever? Yeah, and now granted, that's hindsight because I've seen the whole movie. But I just was thinking about those breadcrumbs, those moments where, like when she first gives Nathan some of the stew and she's like, oh, what? He's like, well, what is this? I like this. What's good? And she's like, oh, there's a lot of barley in it. I would have probably, oh, the movie's Death Among the Barley. I would have thought, oh, okay. Maybe she's the one, that's doing the murders in here. Whereas Death Among
yeah,
the Pines, I never had that thought.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, like I say, I think the title kind of feels suggestive, and it feels a bit more inherently like it would be a thriller. So I suppose that can put people's expectations going in a certain way. But again, as as I say, we're hoping that we kind of lead them one way and it kind of surprises them when it shifts another way.
Yeah, yeah, it worked for me. I will say it worked for me. I think, especially when we get to the love scene, because we'd already started to get these moments where we get a sense of who Nico's character is, who Angela is, but the love scene really kind of blows it up a bit, but it blows it up in a way that if you're Nathan's character or if you're Steven's downstairs hearing it all, it might not be quite the same. I think as a person watching, you're like, okay, this character's a little different, and I have a feeling she's going to start turning tables on people here. Like things are going to start happening a little differently the way that played out. I thought that was a really fantastic way, and it definitely worked for me in that sense. I went in thinking I was getting one movie, and I got something else completely different.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. We're glad you enjoyed it, mate.
Yeah, no, I definitely it was a really great time. Well, Tom, again, congratulations on the film. Another great one that you've got here, and thank you for coming on to chat about it.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And again, hopefully, if you haven't seen the movie yet, you didn't listen to this part. But if you did, still go watch it. Go support indie filmmakers because it's again, I think it's always an important thing. And again, the best way to think of it is if you go watch a Marvel movie, Disney doesn't really care. You're one of hundreds of millions of people that have seen the movie. But indie filmmakers, it does matter to them if you see their movie. So you can sort of give a gift when you're watching the movie as well this holiday season. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.